When it comes to old school MapleStory, a lot of history is lost to time. Multiple websites that were once a source of this knowledge have been shut down for a variety of reasons without proper backups. If you weren't there, it's quite difficult to put together what scarce information remains on the internet nowadays. Since I started making videos about old school MapleStory, I've put together, for my own personal use, a comprehensive list of every update from the early beta until version 93, which was the Big Bang update. In my videos, I reference this list often to verify information, but it's a bit scattered throughout those videos. So, in this video, I'll be putting together as much information as I can possibly find about the updates of OSMS, documenting the timeline and interesting changes with each patch leading up to Big Bang, including the beta. There's a lot to discuss here, and I'm highly likely to miss something. As is usually the case with these videos, you can check the comments section below for anything important I might have missed. I want to make it clear that this is not going to be an exhaustive list of every single thing, as that would take far too long. I'm only including things that I think are interesting or relevant to developing a deeper understanding of MapleStory's evolution. A lot of information and images you'll see in this video have been scraped together from various blog posts that are still up, videos that were taken back in the day, and countless hours spent scouring the internet for one specific image or piece of information that I would end up finding in someone's public online college storage directory from 2006. My favorite thing about making these videos is this process, taking all of this scattered knowledge and turning it into an easily accessible and easy to watch video. Before we get into these updates, there's only one thing left to discuss, so grab a snack, relax, and enjoy this journey through the history of GMS updates. MapleStory was initially developed by a company called Wizet. Wizet is the story of three people, but we're going to be focusing on just one of them, Seung-chan Lee, the CEO of Wizet. While attending Seoul National University, he moved into a small studio apartment and made 2 games, but only made a gross profit of about $1,500. Lee joined Nexon for the sake of his military service exemption in 1997 and worked on a game called Quiz. Lee heavily opposed the monthly paid model of Quiz and fought to keep it out of the game, but the higher-ups at Nexon forced him to implement this monthly fee. His pushback against the corporate overlords made him relatively unpopular within the company, and he decided to leave shortly after his military service exemption ended. Despite this, Quiz was considered a big success. Wizet was founded in 2001 and was not a successful company at first. They survived on loans and had an uncertain future. Looking through archives of the Wizet company website, we see the first complete archive in September 2002. Archives exist before this, but they're not properly saved. The website is primarily written in Flash, of course, it was the 2000s, and there's not much to say about it. However, on this Wizet archive is the announcement posted in November 2002. It states, "The official MapleStory website has been opened." Prior to this announcement, the website MapleStory.com first held placeholder text, then it looked almost identical to the Wizet website, and eventually held this placeholder image called alpha-title01.jpg. The title of the webpage simply read, "Welcome to MapleStory Land." We already knew that development of MapleStory began in 2002, and we can confirm this by looking at these archives. But the concept came about before Wizet was even founded. Seung-chan Lee wanted to make a game that stood out in a sea of dark, realistic 3D RPGs. Wizet borrowed massive amounts of money to develop MapleStory, and the entire time the game was being developed, Seung-chan Lee himself stated that he did not know whether MapleStory would be a success. MapleStory was eventually launched in Korea on April 29, 2003, and this is the first non-beta version of the game to be released. Wizet saw incredible success with MapleStory very quickly, and Seung-chan Lee was able to pay off his debt of roughly $310,000 in 2 months after launching the game in Korea alone. All he ever wanted to do was make a living by making games, and for the first time he believed he could do that, but the sudden success left an after effect on him. Achieving this massive success at such a young age gave Seung-chan Lee serious anxiety. After a year of MapleStory service and constantly doubting whether he should even be a game developer, he sold MapleStory and Wizet as a whole to Nexon and left the company to study abroad in Canada. Wizet was completely liquidated by December 2005, being nothing more than a shell corporation until 2009. The Wizet company website continued to look like this until the liquidation in 2005, when it turned into a Flash animation that was never properly archived. It's playing the Beachway track from MapleStory though, that much we know. Seung-chan Lee had made $25 million from the sale of MapleStory and Wizet, but he was lost. He didn't know what to do with himself. He did some soul searching, and not only did he eventually regret selling MapleStory, but he also realized that being a game developer was his calling. He rejoined Nexon and worked on a couple other games, including MapleStory 2, but it's said that he has since left the game industry. He received a master's degree in business administration from the University of Washington and has published a few programming books. We don't really know what the father of MapleStory is up to now. Maybe we'll hear from him again someday. This leads us to the version of the game we received in the West, Global MapleStory. As I mentioned in the Race to 200 video, the first iteration of the GMS website was mapleglobal.com. It seems like this domain was being squatted on for a while and was eventually purchased by Nexon. The first and only archive of the beta website looks like this, and very few things work. Luckily, all of the important information for archiving updates was saved, but there are a few interesting announcements we can look at. First of all, we have an announcement discussing email verification, with a little teaser at the bottom for the release of Osiria, which was constantly discussed by players in beta. There's also an announcement acknowledging the lag players were receiving after the version 31 beta update. The overwhelming majority of these notices and updates are broken links, which sucks, but that's the nature of MapleStory history. You just run into a lot of dead ends. Global MapleStory's beta began sometime in September of 2004. The earliest patch notes we have access to are dated September 21st, but with versions 0.01 through 0.03 being lost, it might have started as early as August. But as we'll see, updates happened randomly and frequently in the beta era. Every version of the beta files is lost media with the exception of version 0.40 beta, which was released on March 25th, 2005. This wasn't the final beta update. There was one more released on April 19th, but we don't have access to those files either. Along with the fact that most of the files are lost, most of the patch notes for beta updates are simply, it's a more complete version of the previous version. This is probably the most meaningless thing they could have said. Some updates do have patch notes, and we'll take a look at those first. Version 0.06 beta, October 21st, 2004. This is the first archived update that wasn't simply a more complete version of the game. This update added the ability to change a character's skin color during character creation. In other versions of MapleStory, skin color is always the same for a newly created character, and any color outside of that requires a coupon purchased from the cash shop to acquire. I don't know if this is the case for every other version outside of GMS, but we got this functionality in GMS pretty early on. This update also saw a change in the description of skills. Prior to this update, it was not known what skills had prerequisites, and this probably caused a huge amount of confusion among players. The game was brand new, and there were no English databases available, so finding this information usually relied on word of mouth. This update added descriptive text to skills that have these prerequisites. We also see some localization fixes, changing the names of a few monsters. Version 0.07 beta, November 4th, 2004. Another small update that added the ability to change a character's hair color at character creation. Again, just like with skin color, I'm not sure if this is unique to GMS. There were also 2 more channels added, likely to alleviate the influx of players as more people signed up for the beta. Version 0.09 beta, November 23rd, 2004. The next update of interest. This was a big overhaul for the account system of MapleStory. Prior to this, players would use their emails to log in, and this update forced all users to create a login ID that must be activated via email to log into the game. There was also a gateway page added, and this was simply to differentiate players between the North American servers and the Southeast Asian servers. In the early days, North American and Southeast Asian players shared GMS until MapleStory was launched on June 23, 2005. You can see that in the beta client, you're forced to select a gateway before reaching the login screen. This was only around for a very short time, however. Version 0.15 Beta, December 20th, 2004. The first Christmas update. In this update, we saw Happyville for the very first time. Monsters throughout the game would drop the setup items that could be used to decorate the trees in the special tree decorating map. This is also the source of a supposed glitch that allowed players to access Osiria early. If a player died on the Happyville map, which was normally very difficult if not impossible to do, they'd be sent back to El Nath. At least that's how the story goes. If this is true, it explains how players in the beta were able to get their hands on Osiria exclusive gear. Initially, when writing this script, I was just going to leave it at that. Just say that I don't know for sure and move on. And while I wasn't able to get an exact answer, there was a little bit of snooping around I could do to maybe get close to an answer. All maps in this game have a return map variable. This is the ID of any map in the game that the player will return to when they use a return scroll or die. I checked the return map variable of Happyville, and it returns the player back to itself. This could be for a couple reasons. The only beta files that aren't considered lost media are version 0.40, so that's all I was able to take a look at. These files would have been well after this update, so it could still be the case that the return map for Happyville was originally El Nath and it was changed. Or maybe the rumor just wasn't true. On a related note, the return map for the El Nath free market, which was never used, is El Nath, so maybe there's something there. Even if there's no answer, I thought it would be interesting to include this. Version 0.24 Beta, January 27th, 2005. This is the biggest update we've seen so far. There's a lot to go over, so let's knock these out. First is the visual effect of shaking the screen. This is something that can be observed with skills like Dragon Roar, where the screen shakes when the skill is used. The throwing star recharge icon was changed, but I wasn't sure what it was changed from. We can see what it was changed to by simply looking at the files, but I looked around and all I could potentially come up with was that the old recharge button that was located on the top right corner of a set of stars used to look something like this and was changed to look like this. The old button is from the old UI, which was used in versions of the game released before GMS until mid-2004. The same likely goes for the part that says minor modifications to NPC dialogues and certain buttons have been made. I believe, based on my research, that this was when NPCs' text would scroll through the boxes whenever you talked to them. Before this, it just appeared, I think. HP, MP, and EXP bars were made larger with this update. The old UI was discontinued right before GMS beta launched, so they were still making small adjustments to it at this time, and this is one of those very small adjustments. Honestly, I like the smaller bars better. A few items were added as well. Processed wood was now craftable, and all types of arrows were added to the crafting NPC in Inesis, Vicious. This is interesting, and I can't remember if crafting these higher tier arrows was actually possible through Vicious, or if this was changed to only be basic arrows after beta. I think it was the latter. Some monsters with ranged attacks had their damage type changed to be physical damage. Originally, these dealt magic damage. Some other monsters were given the ability to buff themselves, and both Junior Boogies and Parries, an incorrect translation of fairies, were added in this update as well. This leads us into the next section of the patch notes, which covers character debuffs. These are all pretty normal, we see them in the game often, but the frozen debuff is something I've never heard of before. It's different from the stunned debuff since it has a separate entry, but it has the same effect. It also doesn't have any visuals associated with it. I'm not sure the frozen status was ever used. I can't think of any instance of seeing it myself. Maybe in the Princess No fight? but that's way after this update. A couple changes to skills. Characters can no longer use heal when hanging on a ladder, which implies that they were able to beforehand, which would have been pretty powerful. You would have been able to attack monsters from a safe spot as a cleric. Crazy. This entry also implies that heal didn't give EXP beforehand, and now it does. The patch notes finally state that some maps have been modified. With these files being lost, I turned to KMS to try and find any information about what maps would have changed. However, the only information I could find was that a few of the zombie maps had their spawns increased in KMS, which doesn't really apply to GMS. We didn't have Osiria. Who knows what actually changed? Version 0.30 beta, February 26, 2005. The ability to report players was added to the game. That's it. Version 0.40 beta, March 25, 2005. Finally, we reached the largest beta update. This likely wasn't truly the largest update in this era, but because it's the only version we have access to, we have a lot of things to discuss. First of all, this beta update further separated the West and East servers, providing separate downloads based on the region. This was also the update that changed a few of the NPC names to the ones we know and love today. There were also changes to the names of some items, but again, it's impossible to find what they were changed from. Dark scrolls were added to the files sometime during beta and went unused for a very long time. They had the correct icons, but didn't have the dark prefix associated with them. Yes, dark scrolls were in the files since the beta. It's kind of surprising. Mushroom Shrine and Showa Town assets were added at some point in beta and were completely uncensored, surprisingly. Regular store permits were in the files at this point as well and specified that they could be opened anywhere, but the owner would still be susceptible to monster attacks, either because of opening them in a map with enemies or because someone spawned a monster using a black sack. Data relating to Zachem was added to the files during beta. The maps were available but were unfinished. Zachem Helmet 1 was referred to as Zachem's Helmet, and Zachem Helmet 2 and 3 did not exist yet. The cash shop was added, but I don't believe it was available until version 6 or 8 of the official release. One of the two. OMOC and match card minigames were in the files, but again were unavailable until later. All third job data was in the files by this point and was completely translated. This is not always the case. Sometimes data will be added early and either have no text associated with it, or the text will be in Korean. Sometimes other languages depending on the origin. Ludibrium maps were added in the beta, again unavailable until much later. Omega Sector also existed in the files but was translated to Omega Scepter, spelled wrong too on top of that. And this is all there is to report about the beta period of the game. Even if we had access to a lot of the lost patch notes, they weren't very descriptive, and we'd need the actual game files to truly know what was changed. It's interesting to see just how much stuff was crammed into this 8-month beta period. Because of KMS, JMS, TMS, and CMS, I believe, all being released before GMS beta, they had a lot of updates to compress into a relatively short time frame. Now we're in the era of GMS's official launch. From here on out, things were much more well documented. While there are plenty of versions that are still lost media, and I'll make sure to mark them appropriately, the game becoming more popular meant that there was more information archived. Updates for GMS are handled in complete version numbers. As of writing this script, GMS is on version 246 and started in version 2. And yes, I said it started in version 2. I'm not sure why, but version 1 doesn't exist, and there are no patch notes for it, so this is where we start. I believe version 1 was really just encapsulating all of beta. Sometime after the Big Bang update, Nexon started to append decimals to the version numbers to indicate a minor update. Because they didn't do this pre-Big Bang, it means that not all updates are made equal. Sometimes an entire version increase would happen, and it would be for no reason other than to fix a single issue. Version 2, May 11th, 2005. This was the official release of GMS. Unfortunately, the release notes for this version really suck. Hi, this is Test Patch. Meaningless. What we do know is that Orbis and El Nath were released with this update. I believe Osiria as a continent was unavailable via legitimate means throughout the entirety of the beta, and this was when it was first available in GMS. The release of Osiria was highly anticipated, to say the least. In the beta, a long maintenance was usually met with something akin to, long update? You know what that means? We're getting Osiria. It became an in-joke that was forgotten with time, almost. Its release was great news, as we know. Osiria contained a lot of monsters that were great for grinding, which killed the era of Sleepywood dungeon farming and allowed players to experience a lot more of the game. You can find out more about the impact Osiria had on the grinding meta by checking out my Race to 200 video, link in the description. Version 3, May 26, 2005. Version 3 was the first official update after the release of GMS. It contained a large number of bug fixes and removed the text in the top right of the screen that said beta version. It's somewhat understandable that they left this in with release, since the beta officially ended in late April, only a few weeks before the official launch. Version 4, June 28, 2005. In tradition with the overwhelming number of updates in beta that simply stated it's a more complete version, Version 4 of the official release gave us this same information, or lack thereof. It was comprised of bug fixes, and there's not much to say about it. Version 5, July 14, 2005. This was the first significant update with something resembling actual patch notes. It starts out describing summer items set 2. Of course, this implies there's a set 1, but with most of these early versions being lost media, it's impossible to look through the files, so I have no clue what set 1 contained exactly. Luckily, we do know what set 2 was, and it's the following: the surfboard and the blunt weapon tubes. Alongside the summer items, we saw the GM events being added as well: Ola Ola, Physical Fitness Test, and Coconut Harvest. I discussed these a bit in the original Iceberg video, but we can cover them again in more detail really quickly. First is Ola Ola. This is an event map wherein players navigate a maze of ladders and ropes to reach the proper teleport to the next map. This is colloquially referred to as a jump quest. However, ironically enough, Ola Ola is the one instance of a jump quest wherein you're not actually allowed to jump. It's completely disabled on these maps. Choosing the wrong teleport will either warp the player back to the beginning or do nothing. Physical Fitness Test is next, and this one is a much more difficult jump quest. In this one though, you're actually allowed to jump. There are junior neckies determined to stop your progress, and lag generated from other players would have made this event incredibly difficult. The last GM event added in version 5 is Coconut Harvest. In this event, players are split into 2 teams. The goal is to knock down the coconuts from trees in the map as fast as possible in the allotted time. When the timer runs out, the team with the most coconuts is the winner, and every member of the winning team receives a scroll of secrets. Unlike regular coconuts in Florina Beach, the amount of hits necessary to knock down the coconuts in this event varies. And some coconuts, while they can be hit, will never fall, which can trick players into wasting time trying to knock them down. It's pretty mean. Version 6, August 8th, 2005. This update added the Omok and Match Card minigames. They were in the file since beta, as I mentioned, but this is when they became officially available. The summer event was still ongoing at this time, and monsters would drop the summer items all over the Maple world, supposedly. Version 7, September 7th, 2005. Version 7 marked the end of the first summer event and included the addition of the Cody and the Theme Park quest. This update also saw the release of the first new world in GMS, Broa. This makes it the 3rd world in the game. More importantly, the Cody and the Theme Park quest is another thing we covered briefly in the Iceberg video. This is a GMS exclusive quest that Cody would give the player. The quest required level 20 and asked the player to turn in a few items and mesos. Cody would give the player a maple flag for doing so. There's a lot of discussion surrounding the continent of Masteria and how it pertains to this quest. NX Pros, a developer for GMS back in the day, eventually confirmed that we would see a fully realized theme park, and players assumed it would be within the Masteria region. However, NX Pros eventually left Nexon, and a lot of the things he promised were forgotten, never developed, and never realized. This is one of many. Version 8, October 17th, 2005. This update presents us with another instance of the "it's an improved version" patch notes, but doing a little digging reveals a lot of cool stuff, and some stuff that people might consider not so cool. If you were an archer or assassin, you were capable of getting critical hits on enemies. Until this update, these critical damage numbers were displayed with the regular orange and yellow numbers. You can observe this in this video someone took of Ninja Garu training sometime between release and this update. He clearly hits criticals throughout the video, but they're all displayed with the normal damage skin. After this update, this is what critical hits would look like instead, and they still look like this 18 years later. The cash shop finally became accessible in this update as well. GameGuard anti-cheat was introduced for the first time. Account gender selection was added to the first-time login along with the terms of service. And lastly, Nexon added their splash screen when starting up the game. Their mark had been in the files since the beta, but this was the first time it was seen in the game. Originally, I was going to discuss the whole Wizet and Nexon topic at this point, but with so much misinformation floating around, I'll leave it at this. Wizet is Nexon and effectively always has been. Is there a company who could have purchased Wizet and MapleStory and maybe run it better than Nexon did? Yeah, probably. But not only is MapleStory still incredibly successful so many years later, but even if Wizet was entirely separate from Nexon and continued running the game, we'd still hear complaints about Wizet all the time. It's just the nature of an MMO community like this to get upset and yell at whoever's in charge. Version 9, October 19th, 2005. In version 9, whoever was writing the patch notes realized that they should probably provide slightly more information. Instead of just, "it's an improved version," we got, "it is a minor patch applied to fix some bugs that have been found after the previous page." An improvement in communication, but it was just bug fixes anyway. Version 10, October 25th, 2005. We're in the double digits now, and this update is one of my personal favorites. This was the very first Halloween event in GMS. Rhea in Kerning City would give the player a pumpkin basket if they brought her enough candies, 250 to be precise. These would drop from red snails and slimes, as well as junior wraiths and zombies who would walk around Kerning City and Sleepywood. These monsters couldn't hurt the player and were a cool addition to the game that exemplifies the weird stuff they used to do back in the day for events. This was also the first original pumpkin basket added to GMS. The pumpkin basket that most players received, myself included, was released with next year's event and had a different name. The 2005 pumpkin basket is probably a very rare item today. Version 11, November 2nd, 2005. Version 11 marks the end of the Halloween event and all the monsters were removed from the towns. This version also saw a huge number of the original cash equip items added to the cash shop. Version 12, November 16th, 2005. This update included something that a lot of us remember from back in the day, the pin system. Until this update, it simply didn't exist. All you needed was a login ID and password to access an account. This 4-digit pin added extra security, but it wasn't a lot of extra security. Something is better than nothing, I guess. This update also contained the first Thanksgiving event that would last until November 30th. The Maple administrator and Genesis would ask the player to collect the letters that spell out MapleStory, entering the player in a raffle to receive a certain number of Maple points if they did so. These letters would drop from a variety of monsters, and both the M and the S had a lower drop rate than the other letters. Turkey enemies were also added with this event, and they could be found all over the place. When killed, they had a small chance to drop either a pilgrim hat, maple hauntus, or chief axe, and more commonly they would drop Thanksgiving food. These are yet more iconic classic event items that gave no stats and were purely cosmetic. Inventory expansion was also added to the cash shop for the first time in this update. Regular hair and hair color coupons for Genesis were added. Nexon was really focused on getting items added to the cash shop, and it makes sense. It was their only source of revenue for the game. Version 13, November 30th, 2005. This update ended the Thanksgiving event and added a large number of cash items. Inexplicably, snowboards up to the Blood Snowboard were added to the game in this update. I guess it's not that weird considering December was right around the corner, but it wasn't really acknowledged much in the patch notes, kind of just added on without explanation. I have very fond memories of running around on my Warrior with my below average Sky snowboard, the lowest tier snowboard you could get, and hunting for hours to try and get a full collection of them. Getting the Aqua snowboard eventually was a big accomplishment for me, but I think I gave up after that. I know I really wanted that silver snowboard though. Version 14, December 20th, 2005. This is going to be the most impactful update we've seen thus far. First off, there were two big events that started in this update. The Christmas event, where you needed to find Thor's horn in the cash shop in exchange for a random Rudolph's red nose. The nose wasn't guaranteed and you could get garbage instead, but I believe this quest was repeatable every day. The noses were also temporary, so they'd all be gone eventually. The second event is less of an event and more of a new world. Windia was the fourth world added to GMS with this update. I know for a fact that this is when I started playing GMS. I saw an ad for it on the 2005 internet, which looked very different from the 2023 internet, and started playing in Windia in this update. I was 10 years old and I fell in love with the game almost immediately. New world releases were pretty common in pre-Big Bang MapleStory. They generated hype, which was good for the game, and might have been added in anticipation of a large influx of players, though GMS never really saw that huge influx. The biggest part of this update, though, was highly anticipated by players for 7 months. Third Job was finally made available in GMS. Alongside the new level 70 job advancement, level 70 equipment was added to the game as well. It existed in the files already, and was probably obtainable from the Scroll of Secrets quest, but was finally made accessible from monster drops. And don't forget that a massive number of cash shop items were added as well. Alright, recording this right as I discover it, so I'm still pretty excited about this. I was doing my normal research, and I found the Third Job teaser flash file that was archived, apparently. Now, before we look at it, there's not a whole lot of stuff here, but it's cool to see, and I really like the music, actually, even though it's incredibly low quality, so let's take a look at it. It loads incredibly fast because it's 2023, almost 2024 as of recording this. But this is what it is. It just says the third flight, this holiday season, begin a new journey. Teasing Third Job. It's so cool! That's so cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't do anything. I think this is supposed to load a web page that doesn't exist anymore, which is a darn shame. Same goes for any of these that you click on. Alright, so I wanted to make sure I included that because I thought it was really cool. Version 15, December 27th, 2005. This one is nothing special. It's a follow-up to the Third Job update, including bug fixes and minor changes. Version 16, January 23rd, 2006. But if you thought version 14 was huge, version 16 was big in its own way. Level 80, 90, and 100 equips were all added to monster drop tables in this update. Guilds were released, and there were some UI changes. I believe the UI changes include removing the 2 large buttons on the bottom right of the screen and replacing them with the multiple buttons that could be used to open a variety of menus. I also believe this to be the update where the cursor was changed from the old blue orb with gold trim to the new white glove. In the version 12 files, the white glove cursor was present and was labeled Cursor 2. This old version of the white glove looks a bit different from the white glove in the version 22 files, where the original blue orb cursor was removed entirely and replaced with it. Because of the fact that versions 13 through 21 are all lost media, this is one of a few things we can't confirm explicitly. We only have empirical evidence based on knowing that in version 12 we had the blue orb cursor, and in version 22 it was gone and we had the white glove cursor. The only UI update in this lost media period that was mentioned in the patch notes happened in version 16, so there's our empirical evidence. Alongside this, I found a screenshot dated February 20th, 2006, and the white glove cursor is present here, which is enough evidence for me to believe that this is what happened. Weirdly enough, the white glove cursor is still present in modern MapleStory, being unchanged for 17 years. They changed it once, 8 months after release, and never touched it again. They must have really hated that blue orb. I loved it personally. The cash shop received an update that allowed the player to preview items before purchasing them. Prior to this update, the cash shop looked something like this, with the image of your character being almost completely static. The one thing I remember vividly with this update, though, is the quest overhaul that they did. This was when they added the quest tracker, the light bulbs above NPCs' heads, and more. Before this update, quest information existed, but it was the bare minimum quest information, with quests being unorganized and not tracking progress as clearly. I don't know why I remember this. I was only 10, so it might have been the first instance of experiencing quality of life improvements in a video game, which is why it stuck out in my mind. There was also the Lunar New Year event. Red envelopes would drop at a very low rate from monsters and could be turned into Mr. Moneybags to open the envelope and get a random amount of mesos. I remember this event, and I never personally got a red envelope to drop. Finally, this update added megaphones, so we have version 16 to thank for the annoying super megaphones we see today. Version 17, February 9th, 2006. Version 17 is one of my least favorite. All pin codes were reset, and the functionality to manually reset them was added. Alongside this, the patch notes told us that it was strongly advised that we change our passwords regularly. As a kid, I wasn't able to keep track of this information easily. I was told to change my password, so I did, and I immediately forgot what it was. After many hours of trying to figure it out, I ended up giving up and making a new account. Nexon caused me to lose my first MapleStory account with their dumb suggestion. I'm not mad about it, definitely not. This update also had the first Valentine's Day event. Ace of Hearts was added to Genesis, and you could purchase a few different materials from Coco to package the chocolate you would find from monsters randomly. The rewards for these quests were fame and chocolate, the consumable item that you could buy from stores. You were only given 3 of each, so I guess the point of the quest was to get the fame. 3 pieces of chocolate doesn't go very far. The cash shop received a lot of items, as is usually the case, but notably, the transparent gloves made their first appearance here. Version 18, February 16th, 2006. In version 18, the Valentine's Day event came to a close, and AP reset scrolls were added to the cash shop. AP reset scrolls have major implications for the meta of the game, being the final piece of the puzzle that allowed HP washing. HP washing was a mechanic that allowed any class to acquire a higher max HP value than intended, with no cap other than the hard cap of 30,000 HP. This was extremely unhealthy for the game, allowing classes who were otherwise balanced by their squishiness to ignore this aspect of the class completely, as long as they were willing to pay the outrageous costs associated with HP washing. This is a strategy I plan to discuss more in the future, so if you're watching this well after it's posted, you can probably find a video about it on my channel. Transparent shoes were added in this update. I think Nexon realized at this point how popular transparent gear was and still is. Nowadays, we even have sales for permanent versions of transparent items. They're still one of the most popular cosmetics 17 years later. A new world was added with this update as well. Kaini, the 5th world in GMS, and my home from its release until its closure many years later. Version 19, March 2nd, 2006. Version 19 was another huge update and one I remember fondly. March 2nd, 2006 was the official release date of the Ludus Lake continent and the region of Ludibrium in GMS. 14 months after the data was originally added to the files. I don't usually feel like including patch duration time is relevant, but this one is worth mentioning as it was one of the largest maintenances in GMS history, taking over 20 hours to complete. Ludibrium brought with it a host of changes to the meta of GMS. Prior to this update, the best training spots in the game were Yeti and Pepe's, Banes, Lucidas, anything that was high level in Osiria. Ludibrium's release came with the Clock Tower, and in the lower levels of the Clock Tower, we found monsters who were far higher level than anything we'd seen in Osiria. We refer to the lower Clock Tower floors as Deep Ludi. Again, I discussed this in more detail in my Race to 200 video. Omega Sector was not released with this update, nor was the boss of Ludibrium Papulatus. These pieces of content were added a few updates later. It was also during this update that the legendary Baron Hermit Tengden 275 put together his iconic video showing off his character leveling to 100. For 2006, the editing in this video is pretty impressive. Plus, with it being such a huge piece of GMS history, it felt wrong not to include it. I still unironically love the music in this video. Version 20, March 27th, 2006. This update was mostly bug fixes. There was a meso explosion glitch that was fixed, but I don't know what the glitch entailed. Without any archives of forums or websites during this era of the game, this information is likely only held in the minds of the chief bandits of the time. Alas, I was not one of these players, so I can't tell you what it was. Version 21, April 5th, 2006. We've made our way to the first ever Easter event in GMS. While Easter is not strictly an American holiday, this is one of those holidays that would be celebrated in GMS in the early days and eventually forgotten like so many of the American holidays we celebrate. GMS is not strictly for North America, so it makes sense even if I don't love that we lost some of our fun in-game events. The Easter quest was started via the Maple administrator, who would ask the player to bring her a few items including a red ribbon. This was the implementation of the red ribbon item that was purchasable for 1 meso in the cash shop alongside Tor's horn. Once you got all of these items, you were rewarded with an Easter basket. This item did nothing but was required for the next step of the event. With the prerequisite Maple Administrator quest completed, the player would head to Hinnesis to speak to Mad Bunny, who had a quest wherein the player would need to collect Easter eggs. The quest was split into 2 tiers, level 8 to 29 and level 30+. The level 8 to 29 quest asked the player to collect yellow Easter eggs, and the level 30 quest asked the player to collect green Easter eggs, which dropped exclusively from higher level monsters. The rewards for either of these quests were identical: a small amount of EXP and an Easter charm item that acted as a single safety charm, the one-time use item that prevents a player from losing EXP upon death. A decent reward back in the day, but I don't think this quest was repeatable. If it was a great reward. If it wasn't, it was just a thing. Also added to the game was the item Golden Egg. There was no information associated with the item, and I'm not sure what it did, so I'm going to assume that if it was obtainable, it was only used for the 10,000 mesos it sold to NPCs for, though we would see this come back next year, so remember it. And that wraps up the first Easter event in MapleStory in 2006. I remember participating in this event, but I was so young. The memories are blurred, as are most of my early MapleStory memories. Version 22, April 18th, 2006. This update was mostly security enhancements, nothing we could see on our end, but likely some anti-cheat measures. Again, because of versions 13 through 21 being lost media, meaning nobody has a copy of them except maybe Nexon, we can't observe exactly when this happened. However, between versions 12 and 22, horned mushrooms had their name changed to horny mushrooms. I mentioned this briefly in my PQ retrospective video, which you can find a link to in the description, and there's not a lot to say about it. It's weird to make a localization change like that when horned mushroom was still grammatically correct and didn't have a weird connotation. This update also changed the name of Zacham's Helmet to Zachem Helmet 1 and added Zachem Helmet 2 and 3 to the game files in preparation for the next update. I don't know if we were ever legitimately allowed to acquire Zachem Helmet 2 and 3, but I still have one on my character in Bera nowadays from a glitch where Zachem was dropping Zachem Helmet 2s instead of Zachem Helmet 1s, which makes me so happy. The free market was changed from its old look in this update as well. We can see here the old free market entrances, of which only the Hinnesis one was ever made accessible. I believe players were able to access the Elnath FM entrance in the beta through glitches, but it was never intended to be reached. The Ludibrium FM entrance was very quickly removed from the files after beta, and was very unfinished before this removal. Again, with versions 13 through 21 being lost, we can only observe this change as early as version 22. It could have happened earlier than this, but there's no known documentation of exactly when this change happened. Speaking of the FM, the regular store permits were updated sometime during this lost era of MapleStory. In version 12, you could open a store anywhere, and in version 22, it was restricted to only the free market rooms, and the description was changed accordingly. This killed the Perion Channel 1 gathering place that we saw in the very early days of MapleStory. I'm sure a lot of people remember this. Version 23, May 3rd, 2006. Now this is a huge update, probably the biggest since the release of Third Job. This update contained Zachem and all content associated with it, including the pre-quests that required you to get 30 lost teeth from minor zombies. This data had been in the files since beta, but was now finally accessible for players to access. I wanted to find out when the first Zachem kill in GMS happened, but there was so much controversy surrounding the topic. Between people hacking to get the server first kills and a huge lack of historical documentation, all I could confirm was the first legitimate kill in Broa, which was on November 12, 2006, 193 days after release. This likely wasn't the first kill ever in GMS, but it's the only one I was able to find any evidence of, and people's memories don't count as evidence. In a separate Zachem kill, we can see Like Talks, Ninja Garu, Tiger himself, and more clearing in Scania. This was definitely before the Broa kill, especially when we consider that a screenshot of the rankings from August 10th, 2006 shows Hydrange, a Scania player, with a Zachem helmet, meaning this is likely around the time of the first kill. Unfortunately, we have no idea whether this Zachem helmet was legitimate or not. You can see now why this information is so difficult to verify. With the release of the first major boss in the game, we also saw the release of the HP bar that sits at the top of the screen to indicate the boss's health. Zachem was the first monster to have this, though it would go on to become a standard implementation for every boss. But Zachem isn't the only thing that makes this update massive. This update also contained the anniversary events, which coincided with Zachem runs nicely since priests would use maple staves for the extra HP. Maple weapons were added with the anniversary event and in general were incredibly powerful. It's probably fair to say that they were completely overpowered. Their existence undermined the design of some classes like warriors and assassins and changed the meta of their stat builds completely. That's a discussion for a different video though. This anniversary update added both the level 35 and 43 Maple weapons, condensing the first two KMS anniversary event items into one anniversary update for GMS. Cake monsters were added alongside a few quests. Cody would ask the player to collect birthday candles from the cake monsters, and in return he would give the player a maple flag, the same maple flag that was obtainable in the past from his theme park quest. The Maple Administrator had another event quest that was designed similarly to the Easter events, with one being for characters under level 31 and the other one being for characters over level 31. Both of these required the birthday presents that dropped at a rare chance from the cake monsters, and if the player turned one in, they would receive either a slice of cake or a random maple bandana. This update also added the super megaphones that we know and deal with. In the official patch notes for version 23, the anniversary items are listed. We can see all of the weapons that were added as well as the maple bandanas, but there's something interesting about the bandanas. The patch notes list a pink maple bandana as being added to the files. This item has never existed, even as of 2023. I looked around for a while trying to find any information about it, but ultimately came to the conclusion that it was nothing more than a typo, which is unfortunate, but at least it created a bit of a mystery for a while. And that's all for version 23. It was a huge update, and I can't overstate how impactful the Maple weapons were for the meta of the game from this point onward. Dexless assassins were born at this time, warriors no longer needed to worry about accuracy in the early game, and the luckless magician build became so overwhelmingly dominant that building normal luck became the inferior off-meta choice. Version 24, June 8th, 2006. This was the release of Omega Sector, 5 updates after the initial release of the Ludus Lake continent. The World Cup celebration event started, but this was nothing more than a cash shop update with World Cup related items available for purchase. In America, we really don't care very much about the World Cup, so I guess this was for other regions who played GMS. We also saw regular cosmetic lens coupons added for Hennesis, Orbis, and Ludibrium. Version 25, June 28, 2006. Independence Day, the 4th of July. Other countries have their own Independence Days, but this one is strictly American due to the date. In fact, the quest Cody gave players actually rewarded an item called the Independence Day hat with red, white, and blue. If that wasn't American enough, there was another item added that was straight up just an American flag. This was given by Agent Marco after a quest called Independence Day Alien Invasion. This is 100% a reference to Will Smith's character in the movie Independence Day. It has to be. The Stars and Stripes weapon is a very rare item in modern MapleStory because of the fact that it was only available from Omega Sector. This area was very out of the way with little reason to be there. Alongside this, the monsters you needed to kill were level 44, which was still pretty high for a lot of players at the time. I believe this event came back in the future in different forms, but the original Stars and Stripes from 2006 might be one of the rarest items in the game. On July 14, 2006, between this update and version 26, Nexon posted a lengthy announcement about NX cache fraud. This notice will address a very serious issue in MapleStory: NX cache fraud. As many of you have already noticed, our admins have temporarily suspended or permanently banned many users today. This is something we take very seriously, and we take action on every infraction of NX cache fraud. Do not participate in the trade of in-game items for NX cache. This will result in a reversed transaction that will lead to an account ban. The notice went on to discuss chargebacks and stolen credit cards being used to make NX purchases that are then reversed by the purchaser through their bank. When this happened, Nexon would be forced to refund the charge and pay a heavy fine to the credit card companies for each fraudulent charge. Remember this, it will come up again in the future. Version 26, July 26, 2006. Yet again, we find another hugely impactful update with this version. Or at least it would have been if not for one small thing. This was the release of Aqua Road, but not the entirety of Aqua Road. Deep Gorge was excluded from this update to be released at a later time. That being said, Aqua Road still held a lot of monsters with great HP to EXP ratios for the time and was a fun new area to explore. The patch notes also state that there were major changes to the game UI. Again, I wanted to see what actually changed, so I tried to look for changes, but I came up empty. It's very hard to track exactly what changed, but I don't think most of it was very significant. Definitely not even close to the cursor changes we saw in version 16. I know they added the book assets around this time, and we would see them used from now on. Experimental hairstyle coupons were added to the game with this update, and this was the beginning of the RNG hair system that we have today. Version 27, July 27th, 2006. This version is also lost media, but luckily it was nothing more than a few bug fixes, taking place one day after version 26. If this was modern MapleStory, this update would not have been a full version number, rather a decimal appended to version 26. Version 28, August 15th, 2006. This was the second half of the Aqua Road update, bringing with it Deep Sea Gorge, which became the new meta training spot for endgame players, beating Ludibrium's EXP rates pretty significantly. This version also saw the release of Pianist, the fish boss in the Deep Sea Gorge. Pianist had a couple drops that were previously exclusive to Zachem, making these items far more accessible. VIP teleport rocks were added to the cash shop for the first time, again a precursor to the system we have in GMS today. The server Bellocan, the 6th GMS server, was launched during this update as well on September 6th, 2006. Internally, there were a few interesting changes as well. Hired merchant information was added to the files to be used later, as well as guild PQ information and 2x EXP coupon data. Version 29, September 12th, 2006. Papulatus finally sees a release in version 29. Ludibrium came out 10 updates ago, and players were waiting desperately for the boss of the area to come out as well. Papulatus didn't have the same impact on the game's meta like certain other releases did, but having a new boss to kill meant another source of EXP that wasn't strictly from grinding, as well as level 90 weapons and armor. Similar to Pianist, some of these items were previously only available from Zachem, who was far more difficult to access and kill than Papulatus was. Helios Tower in Ludibrium became available at this time, but I'm not sure if the elevator was accessible. Helios Tower eventually leads to Korean Folktown, which wouldn't be out for a few more updates, so I'm not sure how this was handled because the elevator is present. This update also saw the release of Gachapon officially in GMS. Before this, the Gachapon machines had some weird names, and they were all changed to be called Gachapon and were released with this update. Internally, the Owl of Minerva data was added to the files to be used for later. Version 30, October 18th, 2006. Now we see the second Halloween event in GMS. The NPC Malady was added to Kerning City, and players could compete to turn in the most Malady candy for a prize. I believe they're referring to the actual Malady candy items and not the regular candies, but I'm not sure. First place would get Maple points and various merch, with 2nd to 10th place receiving 10,000 Maple points. Cody was the event quest NPC once again, this time providing the 2006 pumpkin basket in exchange for 100 Halloween candies. This year, slimes were reskinned to be a bit Halloween themed during the event. I'm not sure if this happened in the first Halloween event, and it's almost impossible to know without the version 10 files. Internally, unfinished Amoria data was added, and the maps looked a bit different than they did on release, which I thought was pretty cool. Version 31, November 7th, 2006. This is the time of year where we would see back-to-back holidays, and with this update, we got the second Thanksgiving event in GMS. Cody would give the player a variety of Thanksgiving food items or potions for turning in the level-appropriate yellow or green turkey eggs that dropped from the turkey monsters. There was also a low chance to receive a miniature turkey pet as well, which would turn into a regular turkey pet after the event was over. I definitely remember getting one of these from the event, and I was super excited about it. Monsters would drop a variety of ingredients to bake a pumpkin pie. These ingredients could be brought to Grandma Benson, who would give you a slice of pumpkin pie as a reward. There was a competition between guilds to see who could bake the most pies, and the winning guilds would receive maple points. They did this a lot back in the day, it seems. Turkeys would drop the usual rare Thanksgiving cosmetic items along with the Thanksgiving food items, and my memories of this event are very strong because of how delicious I thought these food items looked on my Thanksgiving school break in 2006. Good memories. The MapleStory letter event came back with the usual reward of maple points after you collected them all and brought them back to the Maple administrator, who entered you into a raffle, just like the last time this event was around. Version 32, December 6th, 2006. This is another significant update for GMS, the initial release of Amoria. Weddings were added, including the quest lines that would allow you to craft the most elegant of engagement rings. There was a whole system of higher quality rings that could be crafted with slightly more expensive materials. Completing quests from the Nana characters found around Victoria Island would give the player a proof of love, and 4 of these would be required before crafting the ring. Marriages could be held in either the chapel or the cathedral, and both the husband and wife would receive 15 invitations each that they could use to invite people to the wedding. The rings would display an effect when the married couple stood next to each other, and being married would allow the player to eventually do a Moria PQ, which was added later. This update also had the Christmas and Hanukkah events, including Happyville. Slimes were recolored to be red and green, which is cute. I don't remember this, but all slimes in the version 32 files have this appearance. There was a Secret Santa-style event with both Maple Claus and Hannah. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to find the actual quest associated with Maple Claus, but I was able to find how Hannah's quest worked. She would give the player Hanukkah presents that must be given to another player before it could be opened. When you received a Hanukkah present, you could turn it into Hannah and she'd give you a random reward from a list that's honestly not very impressive. The Zecco could NPC for a decent amount, but there was one item that was very good that you could get from this quest, as well as from a separate quest Hannah would give the player: Gelt Chocolate. These were incredibly overpowered buff potions that gave 120 attack and defense for 10 minutes. 15 minutes if you were a hermit with maxed alchemist. Version 32 was the first time they were ever seen in the files, so this was the original way to acquire these Gelt chocolates, though we'd see them again in the future. Mages had their version of the Gelt chocolate as well, the Bananagram Pie. I'm not sure if this quest was accessible in GMS during this update, but the Bananagram Pie, along with Mr. Kit Kat and the quest that rewarded the pies, were all added during this update. There's no mention of it in the patch notes, but Mr. Kit Kat was on the Happyville map, so if his quests were available, you could give him 50 graham crackers in exchange for 2 pies. You could also save the graham crackers and participate in the event where the guild with the most total graham crackers at the end of the event would receive maple points. It appears as though there was a New Year's quest associated with the Maple Administrator in this update. It wasn't mentioned in the patch notes, but I found it in the files, and it appears that the Maple Administrator would give the player a New Year's present that could then be turned in for one of the following items. Again, none of these are very good. I would have honestly rather kept the New Year's present itself for the memories of New Year's 2007. Tor's Lost Horn quest was back with the same red nose rewards, and that was version 32's Christmas update. Version 33, January 11th, 2007. Now we enter 2007, and another meta-changing piece of content was added to the game. This one was not the most impactful, but it definitely had an effect on the economy, if only slightly. Amoria received a bit of an expansion. The Purple Plains maps were added, and with it the Sakuracelians. Sakuracelians are a reskinned junior cat monster that you would find in Orbis, but they did one thing better than the rest. They dropped hundreds of mesos at once. In the mid-30s, you could expect monsters you train on to give you anywhere from 50 to 150 mesos at best, but Sakuracelians dropped 232 to 348 mesos per kill, more than double what your average monster would be dropping at this level. Players were able to farm over 100,000 mesos per hour as early as the mid-30s, which wasn't incredibly overpowered, but was super helpful in the era of potion costs and grinds that take many hours, even in the early game. This update also added the iconic Beauty or Beast quest that would reward the player with a free hairstyle after talking to Claudia and giving her 25 squishy liquids. Despite the quest claiming that you could get a variety of hairs, the only one I ever got on all of my characters was the orange bowl cut. I'm actually incredibly curious if anyone watching this ever received anything besides the orange bowl cut hairstyle. It always seemed like a rumor, and that the quest was just a way to encourage people to change their hairstyle after getting the orange bowl cut, which just looked ridiculous. Nexon prepaid cash cards were officially made available in a few different regions starting on January 16th during this update. A quest was added involving the Mom and Dad NPC to celebrate the launch of these prepaid cash cards. If you talked to Mr. Spot in Kerning City, who was only available during this patch, you could turn in the allowance you got for completing the quest and receive a random Maple Point card item, either 100 points or 250 points. These would sit in the player's etc. inventory until the next update, where they would be turned into Maple Points. This was a pretty smart implementation because it prevented any abuse that might potentially occur with this questline. The items would need to be turned into NX at the end of the event by Nexon, and they were able to check how many cards each account had. This was also limited to one character per account, whichever one had the most cards. Version 34, February 6th, 2007. This contained the guild party quest Sharenian Ruins. I've already discussed the guild PQ in great depth in my party quest retrospective video, which you can find linked in the description. It's really cool and there's a lot to it. The package delivery NPC was also added with this update. His original name was Bill, but this would be changed shortly after this update. This was also the second Valentine's Day event, and this one was far more interesting than the previous one. Version 34 added the Valentine Roses, which dropped from every mob, and I believe the last year's Valentine's event quests were repeatable. The Valentine's Roses, similar to the snowboards, are another iconic item from OSMS that I'm sure a lot of people remember. They're honestly kind of weird when you think about it. We also saw the Lunar New Year's event come back in the same form as last year. A number of cool, unique items were added in this update, and they were acquired from Mr. Sandman via the Wish Ticket event. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who know what Wish Tickets are, but always wondered what they were used for. These tickets dropped from monsters with certain colors corresponding to certain level ranges. They could be turned into Mr. Sandman for a variety of items, but the big ticket items you were likely looking for were the Lunar Gloves, the LaFay Jester, the Eclipse Earrings, the Herculean Crown, the Lockwood Hat, the Pickpocket Pilfer, and the Eclipse Cloak. Fun fact, I found the exact number required for each item on Cold Fusion's blogspot page that looks like this. I'm sure this is a lot of nostalgia for someone out there. Thanks for the info to make this video a little better. Version 35, March 21st, 2007. Another update that contained a party quest. This one is my personal favorite party quest from the story alone, and you can find out more about it in my party quest retrospective video. Guilds were now able to have up to 100 members after expansion. A fee was paid for every expansion, starting at 500,000 mesos and going all the way up to 2.5 million mesos. This update also saw the release of the 7th world in GMS, Mardia. Mardia seems like such a new world to me, it's hard to imagine that it came out at the same time as something as old as OPQ did. Pet guides were now sold from the NPCs that sell pet food, and every character made from this point on would start with a beginner guide. They were really putting those book assets that they added in version 26 to use with this update. NPCs received a change that would display their purpose underneath their name, facial expression shortcut commands were added, and there's one thing I'm kind of confused about: the Whisper History mode. The patch notes claim that it was possible to save your whispers to other players, but this was ambiguous, and I honestly don't know what it means. I think it's referring to the fact that there was a system added that still exists today where you can see who you last whispered. So that's not really saving the whispers, that's saving the names of the people you whispered. Maybe I'm wrong about that though. An internal change that we were never able to observe was the complete removal of all internet cafe related content in this update. This data had been in the files since the first beta version of the game, translated and everything, but since internet cafes are not really a thing in America, I guess they thought it would never be used, and they were right, of course. Zachem was updated. Nothing about the actual boss changed, but the method of entry was altered to an expedition type of entry process. Someone would initiate the sign-up phase for the boss, and players could sign up for the expedition. The leader of this expedition could go in whenever they wanted, taking everyone who signed up with them into the fight. I'm not sure how many players could sign up for one expedition, I believe it was 20. And finally, the hired merchant was made available for the cash shop, the Employee Elf 14-day item. This was a player store item that would stay active as long as the server was up without requiring the user to be online. This system became the standard for many years after this until the auction house was released like 10 years later. Information about hired merchants was available as early as version 28, but this was the first update that actually mentioned them, so either they were available as early as version 28 or added between then and now. Version 36, March 26, 2007. This is the first update we've had in a while that was simply a bug fix. The Owl of Minerva, which was added sometime between version 29 and 35, I actually don't know exactly, would crash the player upon use. Alongside this bug, the penguin pet would not respond to any commands, which prevented it from being leveled. These weren't huge issues, but they definitely needed to be fixed. Version 37, April 17, 2007. Korean Folktown was finally released with this update, along with every quest associated with it. These quests were really fun and gave decent EXP for their level. I remember doing them often on any character I got to that level range. Since Korean Folktown is in a location that's off the beaten path, it's only accessible from Helios Tower, Library, and the Edge of Aquarium. I don't know how this was handled for the library, as I mentioned earlier, but in Aquarium, the Sharp Unknown, which was the map that connected to the well in Korean Folktown, went through a bit of change in this update. Prior to version 37, it looked like this. After this update, the Dolphin Sign and Portal were added to this area on the top right of the map. The only other item to cover in the patch notes for version 37 is that Nexon officially removed channel 20 at this time, and all servers would contain only 19 channels for years to come. They say they did this in the name of bandwidth, efficiency, and a performance boost. We don't really know why they did this otherwise, so I guess we have to take their word on this one. I've heard rumor that KMS's channel 20 was dedicated to adults only, and if that's the case, that might explain why we didn't have a channel 20 for so long, since we didn't have a system like this. The package delivery NPC was renamed to Dewey with this update, no idea why. Most excitingly, 4th job skill data was added to the files. We wouldn't see it for a while longer, but it was there in the files. Initial Horntail data was added alongside this, including the Horntail necklace information, the 9 Spirits egg, which was used in the quest to upgrade the Horntail necklace, and a few other things like leaf-free content that would all be released later. 4th job skill and mastery books were also added. Version 38, May 1st, 2007. This is the second anniversary event. The Maple Snowboard and Maple Shield were added with this second anniversary, as were the 4 Maple Hats, but we still saw the same Maple weapons otherwise. No level 64 Maple weapons for us yet. There was an ongoing 2x EXP and drop event, and I would be so excited for this update if I was in my 20s back in 2007. I don't think I even cared about it when it actually happened. Maple shields were in the files for the first anniversary event, but they weren't mentioned in the patch notes, and from the research I've done digging through forums, nobody had one until this second anniversary update. I'm not sure why they withheld it. Perhaps they wanted to release the Esther Shield and Mystic Shield with Ludibrium before releasing the Best in Slot Maple Shield, but who knows the real reason. There were web events, including a design your own weapon and mob event, but the screenshots on the website are kind of a dead end. We will see a follow-up to this soon. The update image states that there's a new area in Victoria Island, but I don't have the slightest idea what this area would be. Maybe when I'm editing, I'll actually look it up and put it on the video. Version 38 saw another update that I think a lot of people remember. The original starting area was replaced with the tutorial camp that stuck around for a long time and was the home of the camper beginner odd job. The anniversary quests were unsurprisingly similar to the ones we saw on the first anniversary. Cody would ask the player to collect 10 birthday candles from cake monsters, and he'd give the player a blue maple flag in return. We saw the Maple Administrator's present turn-in quest make a return as well, and this time she gave out more cake, and if you were lucky, a second anniversary bandana. The second anniversary was quite the repeat of the first. Rightfully so, there's not much they needed to change at this point. I don't think I remember this anniversary event very well, but like I said before, my memories of being 11 are kind of blurry. In this version of GMS, it was discovered that there was a glitch with OPQ that would allow players to gain a huge amount of EXP in a short period of time, far more than simply rush PQing would get you. I failed to cover this in my Party Quest retrospective video, so let's go over it now. I'm going to assume you know about smuggling and have seen that video. In a glitch OPQ, every member of the party would have a statue piece that was smuggled from the storage room, and they'd all head back there to initiate the glitch. This involved clearing stage 1, but that was not a big deal for the amount of EXP you would get. In the storage room, all 6 players would talk to Chamberlain Eek and wait until the exact same time to finish his dialogue. This, for some reason, would trigger the EXP reward for the room 6 times, once for each player, without taking away the statue pieces that could then be resmuggled to repeat the process. This was such an efficient method of grinding, giving up to 51,000 EXP per clear, which took about 4 minutes, allowing a player to complete levels 51 to 70 in 31 hours at max efficiency. This doesn't sound very fast, but for 2007, it was absolutely broken. It was hotly debated among the players whether participating in glitched OPQs would result in a ban, but I'm not sure anyone ever got banned for it. It was around for a few months and was common knowledge, so I imagine if players were banned for this glitch abuse, it would have been more widely known. Version 39, June 12, 2007. The Amorian Party Quest was added in this update. Again, I covered this PQ in the Party Quest retrospective video, but I will note that it included onyx apples and this was the first time we saw them. In fact, they were added to the files with this update. While a lot of content is added beforehand, this was not the case here, and was not usually the case for non-KMS content. Zipengu was finally released and everyone celebrated, at least until they realized that Showa Town was not released with it. There were still plenty of nice training spots, but Himeis were not added until a little later. Cody received a visual change in this update. Originally, as we've seen, he was sitting on a little rock of his own. After this update, he was just a normal NPC again. It's weird, but they probably did this so that they could put him in more areas without it seeming out of place. He still retained his event quest giver status and had a barbecue quest for the player that rewarded the Stars and Stripes and Maple Barbecue. This was the second time we saw the Stars and Stripes weapon. Maple Barbecue was a decent buff potion that gave plus 13 weapon attack and magic attack for 20 minutes. Incredibly useful in the early game where weapon attack was hard to come by. 2x EXP cards were added to the cash shop with this update as well, but only the original variations that applied during specific hours. We wouldn't see the 4-hour 2x EXP cards for a while longer. Version 40, July 25th, 2007. We've covered a few massive updates for GMS at this point. Things that are meta-defining, things that allowed players to get more EXP per hour, bosses, and overpowered Maple weapon events. But we haven't seen anything as utterly game-changing and meta-defining as what New Leaf City and the continent of Masteria as a whole did to GMS. There will be a video about Masteria and the impact it had on the game on my channel if you're watching this in the future. It's one of many topics I still plan to cover. This content, I believe, was first introduced to us in GMS. When it was released, it wasn't balanced very well. The potions added with NLC were not only incredibly overpowered, but also ridiculously underpriced at first. This was changed very quickly and was changed multiple times for balancing reasons. Alongside the overpowered potions, there was a huge glitch that came with the initial release of NLC. Meet Boomers, the MapleStory enemy. They're level 27 with 700 HP and give 55 EXP per kill. They have a unique mechanic that allows them to duplicate after reaching a certain HP threshold. This is a mechanic we see in RPGs all the time, like the green drop enemies in Secret of Mana. It's less commonly found in MMOs, and we're about to see one of the reasons why. In version 40, the threshold to get Boomers to replicate was 50 HP out of their 700. Fire Poison Mages could use their Poison Mist skill to tick down the Boomer's HP to 1, since the skill never actually killed any monsters, and this was a very reliable way to replicate Boomers. This doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, the difference between an overpowered implementation of this type of enemy and something that's balanced lies in the number of times the monster can replicate itself. This would mean that for every boomer on the map, another one can be replicated, and that would be the limit before new boomers would need to be spawned. This makes sense. Instead, and it's so ridiculous when you think about it that it seems like this could not have been intentional, secondary boomers were not given the restriction disallowing them to replicate. This would create an endless chain of boomer generations that had no end, and this quickly got out of hand. Not only did this create a scenario where boomers were suddenly the best EXP all the way up to early third job, but without any sort of cap, this caused massive strain on the servers. Channels would crash, players would abuse the boomer replication bug for crazy amounts of EXP, and drops from boomers were very easy to come by. Luckily, with them only being level 27, they didn't drop anything crazy. This was very quickly fixed in an update on July 31st that adjusted both the prices of potions and added the restriction that disallowed secondary boomers from replicating. There's plenty more to discuss with NLC, and these two issues were just the tip of the iceberg, but I'll leave it there for now. Despite being overshadowed by the release of NLC, fake boss monsters were released in this update. This is another topic that was on the iceberg video. They had far less HP, spawned in various maps, and dropped cakes. New 2x EXP cards with different time zones were added with this update. Internally, Dark Scroll data was finalized, with the remaining Dark Scrolls finally having their names fixed. The free market was once again updated to add the Maple TV system, remove the storage NPC, and move Frederick to be above the entrance. Version 41, August 21st, 2007. Mulung and Herbtown were both added in this update. These two areas held very underutilized content with a couple of exceptions and were never spectacular. New Leaf City received a free market entrance and the addition of White Scrolls to its gachapon. White Scrolls are an upgrade item that will protect a piece of equipment from losing a slot to a failed scroll one time. They did not, however, prevent Dark Scrolls from blowing up the item. White Scrolls were never found in the files before this update, and I'm not sure where they come from. According to Assault on the Hidden Street forums, who was quoting someone else from Sleepywood, they come from TMS. Oh, if only he knew how right he was about this statement. We share a lot of overpowered things with Taiwan MS. That was the case in 2007, and that is the case still today, even if I'm not a big fan of this fact. A few maps were added to Mushroom Shrine with this update, including Encounter with the Buddha, which is the map Himeis are found in. You can find out more about Himeis and the major impact they had on the race to 200 in my video covering it. The Shadow Style effect was added to the cash shop with this update. It's not an impactful addition, but I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who love this effect even nowadays, so I figured I would mention it. There were a few bug fixes with this update. The Amorian Challenge seems to have had inaccessible stages, and this was fixed. The Glitch Orbis PQ was also finally fixed, meaning no more free rides to level 70. Internally, data for Ludibrium Maze PQ was added to the files in this update. Version 42, September 17th, 2007. This is a very PQ-heavy update, with two new PQs being released. Hinnis' PQ and Ludibrium Maze PQ. Both of these were covered in detail in my Party Quest retrospective video. NLC potion prices were supposedly adjusted again, but people on forums were reporting that they were unchanged. Since this data is server-side, I have no way to confirm or deny this. If prices were changed, they were likely increased since they were such strong items. Around this time, players were eagerly awaiting the release of Showa Town, especially after seeing that one of the rewards from LMPQ was the fruit milk item that acted as a return teleport to Showa Town when used. It was accidentally included early, and this gave people a lot of hope that Showa would be releasing soon. Avatar megaphones were added in this update and were pretty unanimously disliked by the player base. The swear filter was updated to be more aggressive, blocking words that relate to ethnicity, meaning players couldn't even say something like Japanese without being censored. Nexon's in-game text chat censorship has always been ridiculous, but this is almost mind-blowing. It further inhibited a player's ability to even talk to other people to a crazy degree. The MapleStory logo shown on the login page was changed in this update. This was also that update that disallowed characters under level 16 to trade more than 1 million mesos a day. I imagine this was an anti-bot measure, but it definitely annoyed players who had mules. The best kind of anti-bot implementation, the one that gets in the way of legitimate players. Version 43, September 20th, 2007. This was an emergency update with the explanation of, "This is for test." This update took place a mere 3 days after the version 42 update, so we can imagine whatever they were fixing was a big deal. Version 44, October 11th, 2007. Now we enter the third Halloween event in GMS. This maintenance was also notoriously long, being extended multiple hours, and eventually lasting a total of 13.5 hours. The new world Cradia was released in this update, being the 8th world in GMS. The swear filter was adjusted, reverting some of the incredibly aggressive censorship from version 42, but this was the update wherein you could no longer bypass the filter by using an apostrophe in the middle of the word. This was the most common method of bypassing the censor, but after this update, people started using repeated vowels as the new standard for censorship bypass. A new feature was added to the login screen that wasn't mentioned in the patch notes. The View All Characters button was added and implemented, but would crash if players tried to log in with it. Masteria saw its first expansion. The Haunted House, canonically referred to as the Prendergast Estate, and Phantom Forest were both initially released. These areas were not in their final form, with more content yet to come for both of them. What did release included the Voodoos that dropped Heartstoppers, the Headless Horseman boss that had a crazy good HP to EXP ratio, and the Nightmare enemies that were slightly underrated in my opinion. In my Race to 200 video, I claimed that Bigfoot was added to the game in this update, but that was incorrect. I do my best to find accurate, confirmable information, but sometimes I make mistakes. The Haunted House was only available to players who had an NX Halloween outfit, either a piece of it or the full outfit. This meant free-to-play players couldn't access the Haunted House and the event quests associated with it yet. This Halloween event was very similar to previous ones, requiring the player to turn in 100 candies that dropped from all enemies to Cody, who would give them a pumpkin basket. Interestingly, this pumpkin basket was still erroneously labeled 2006 SE, and players were very confused about this. It was never changed, despite people hoping it would be, and this was the last version of the pumpkin basket ever added to the files. Malady candies seemed to drop as well for whatever Malady's events were. There was a web event where players could guess how many candies were collected in total throughout all of GMS, with the person who guessed the closest receiving 200,000 Nexon cash. Nexon cash is a distinct currency from Maple points, and I'm not sure this was a typo. They hold the same purpose, so they might have actually given out 200,000 NX cash. There was a MapleStory cosplay event where 10 lucky winners could receive 15,000 Nexon cash. This update marks another milestone and precedent that we'd see all the way up until modern day. Bad Moonlight's design for the Design a Weapon event hosted in version 38 was added to the game. Since this is one of the few updates that still has surviving images, we also learned that another user won a monster designing event, but stole the art from an artist's blog and submitted it as their own. They were disqualified and this monster was never added to the game. Finally, this update teases that the Chronicles of Masteria have just begun, which couldn't be more accurate. Version 45, October 25th, 2007. This was a small patch that didn't change anything and simply added the ITCG trading card in-game content to the files. This was the first set of ITCG items and cards. Version 46, October 31st, 2007. It was around this time that archives of the GMS website began to be properly saved, with increasingly more pages and images available as time goes on from here on out. And perhaps unsurprisingly, this update contained nothing. It was the end of the Halloween event, and the Haunted Mansion was no longer restricted to players wearing NX, but the quests associated with it were removed. Version 47, November 15th, 2007. The annual Thanksgiving update. This is another one I remember vividly, better than the last one even. The usual cosmetic item drops were available from turkeys, but instead of regular turkeys, we received turkey commandos. These are a twist on the turkey monsters inspired by NLC and Masteria, and they have a ranged attack that makes them incredibly annoying. They also had bad animations where they wouldn't have a hitbox for a few frames, making them extra difficult to kill. Gender selection was added to the character creation screen. In version 8, they added an account gender selection on first-time login. This would mean that an account would be locked to a single gender, and all characters created on that account would only ever be that gender. After this update, the account gender variable no longer mattered, as all characters could be created with any gender. The NX gifting feature was brought back into the game, this time using some sort of gift token system that I was not able to find out much information about. I'm also not sure when it was removed in the first place, though I imagine it would have been around version 25 due to NX cash fraud, as we discussed previously. The last interesting part of this update is the return of the Maple Point card quests. The quest involved collecting all the ingredients for Thanksgiving dinner from the commando turkeys and bringing them back to mom and dad. They'd give the player allowance, which could be spent at any of the newly added stores that you would find in various towns to get an NX card. The quests to turn in the allowance each had 5 iterations, and I believe this meant you were restricted to only claiming the NX cards 5 times per store. As a certified old person now, I find this event to be very cute, and I loved participating in it when I was 12 years old. When looking through old forums, putting together what information I could, I found an odd subset of players who really hated the "CC please" colloquialism that developed in GMS. Originally, I wasn't going to mention this. These players thought it was stupid and that other players should write out a novel for them, otherwise proper communication could not possibly occur. This was partially due to the general pushback against the new lexicon that the internet brought with it in the 2000s, but was also just seen as a rude way to interact with people. Anyway, the Junior Reaper CC Please item was added to the game in this update, pissing off this group of people who already had a problem with this phrase. This hatred for the term CC Please continued on for years after this, and I'm sure there are people watching this video right now who still think it's a very rude way to interact with someone. Personally, I don't care now, and I didn't care back then. I don't feel entitled to politeness from every single random person I encounter. Version 48, December 13th, 2007. The Christmas events are back. The best time of the year, honestly. Herbtown PQ was added, and I covered this in the Party Quest retrospective video. Hair Shop membership coupons were added to the cash shop in this update. I believe these would last for 30 days, and in those 30 days you are allowed to change your hairstyle at the corresponding location as many times as you want. I don't have great information on this hair membership system, but I believe it only allowed you to choose from the normal selection, which would mean EXP hairstyles were not available with this coupon. This year's Christmas event was the Maplemas vs. Versalmas event. Little Susie had a quest that required the player to choose between Maplemas and Versalmas, and the player would receive a hat that corresponds to their choice, either a Maplemas hat or a Versalmas hat. Picking a side would commit the player to that side for the rest of the event, and trading in presents to the appropriate NPC would contribute to that side's server-wide total. At the end of the event, players who chose the winning side in their server would receive a prize. I don't know what prize it was though. The Snowman event boss was implemented in this Christmas event. Players would turn in never-melting snow until the snowblower had 50,000 total, at which point the Snowman boss would spawn. Players would use their magical mittens to throw snowballs at it, and eventually, after 3 phases, it would die, dropping a ton of presents. These could be turned into bill for a random prize. The most interesting thing on this list, in my opinion, was the steelies you could get from the White Christmas present box. Mr. Kit Kat is actually mentioned in these update notes, so this might have been the first time his quest was accessible. Fake bosses were back on New Year's Eve for just 1 day. World transfers were implemented in this update, costing 25,000 NX apiece with some restrictions. You'd purchase it, send in a request to transfer, and it would take place in the following server check. Characters were only allowed to take up to 1 million mesos with them at once to help limit the impact on the economy, and they were not allowed to transfer to the most recently released server. A lot of cool items were added in this update, including the Maplemas lights, the Dragon Can Jar, and the bow tie items, surprisingly. I didn't know they were added that early. Version 49, January 23rd, 2008. Another massive game-changing update. 4th Job was released in version 49, and with it came Leafree. This shook up the game to an insane degree. I won't go into it too much here, as that would take a long time to discuss, but this was a huge meta shift that people absolutely could not wait for. 3rd Job was getting boring after 2 years, so I understand why. There was only so much to do. The Legendary Spirit skill was released in this update. This is a skill that allows the player to scroll any item regardless of its requirements. Before this update, in order to scroll something, you had to be able to equip it. Mounts were released in their first iteration. Both the Wild Hog and the Silver Mane were released, and the Red Draco was added to the files for the first time. This wouldn't be accessible by players for quite a while longer though. Horntail was not released in this initial 4th Job patch. The Horntail pre-quests were available so that people could finish their skill quests, but the boss itself was not yet accessible. This update saw huge improvements to the game UI and general quality of life improvements. World maps were updated, and a lot of areas that previously didn't have a world map were given one. Parties could now reassign the leader without being forced to remake the whole thing. The quest alarm feature was added, which is still in the game in the same form, by the way. Monsters were given names and HP bars, which is also mostly unchanged in modern day. The buff/skill icon timer was given an overhaul. Before this update, buffs would always be displayed as a solid image in the top right of the screen, and after this update, they would slowly become obscured from the bottom until they expired. They always flashed when they were running low on time, but this now gives a better visual indicator for their duration. The marriage heart was added to the player info UI, making it easily recognizable whether someone was married or not. Internally, data for Ariant was finalized and added to the files, some of it left untranslated. Level 64 Maple weapons were also added to be released later. Version 50, January 30th, 2008. This was a bug fix patch that took place about a week after the 4th job update and fixed a few bugs, including one that would disconnect archers who attacked at close range if they had at least 1 point in Mortal Blow. There was even an auto-ban glitch with the travel NPC hack. I don't know specifics, but a lot of players were falsely banned for 30 days. Version 51, February 13th, 2008. While this update contained a lot of bug fixes, it wasn't entirely bug fixes. Some things were released. ITCG Set 2 items came out with this update, as did new Ludibrium quests. Notably, Crystal Ilbies were first available in this version of the game through NLC. This update also contained the Face Stompers, the all-class shoes that come clean with weapon attack. There was no mention of it in the patch notes, and it seems like it was overlooked, but the Valentine's Day events should have happened in this update. If they did, they were very underreported and nobody really cared. On March 14th, 2008, during this update, Fangblade became the first player to reach level 200. You can hear more about this in my Race to 200 video. Version 52, March 19th, 2008. The Easter events came back once again, and the quests were the same, but this time, Mad Bunny would allow the player to turn in a golden egg which dropped randomly for a random amount of EXP based on the player's level. This was the first update where I was able to confirm this information, so this quest could have existed back as early as version 21. Some quests aren't actually saved to any client files that we had access to and were purely server-side, so I don't know if this was around before this year's Easter event. Monster Carnival PQ was released in this update, and you can find out more about it in my Party Quest retrospective video. Horntail was finally made available. Unlike Zachem, I have concrete evidence of the first Horntail kill in GMS. On March 21st, 2008, a Horntail squad of 32 people, including Tiger, took down Horntail for the first time in GMS, only 2 days after release. And to wrap up version 52, 4-hour 2x EXP and drop cards were made available for purchase in the cash shop. Version 53, April 2nd, 2008. The April Fool's event, the first of its kind, was released in this update. They had special cross-dressing outfits that players could purchase in the cash shop. As is often the case, the information for this event is lost to time. Unless someone somewhere has this webpage cached on a very old hard drive or these pictures saved, there's not much more to be said about it. The Maple Trade System, the MTS, was also added in this update. This was a system where players could trade NX for items and vice versa. It was the source of many exploits, but in version 53, it was just an exciting new addition. Internally, 3 new world maps were added: Amoria, Masteria, and Haunted House. I can't remember whether these were ever used in OSMS, but they're there in the files. Version 54, May 7th, 2008. The highly anticipated Showa Town was finally released in version 54. For the past 15 or so updates, players had been begging Nexon to release it, and there was good reason for its delay. Well, not good reason, but a reason. It was heavily censored. I discussed this a bit in my original Iceberg video, so you can check that out if you want to learn more. The short version is, we received a heavily censored Showa Town that removed guns and weapons and turned the Yakuza members into animals that were disguised as humans who would transform back into the animals when they died. Players thought it was a pretty insulting thing to do in a game that features plenty of violence already, but it's what we got. Funny enough, removing the guns was kind of pointless since we'd be getting pirates relatively soon. Fake bosses saw a return in this update once again. Face and eye accessory scrolls were added for the first time, but the biggest part of this update was the 3rd anniversary event. In the patch notes, Nexon conveniently left out the level 64 weapons, but we know they dropped since people were getting them. In fact, I think they dropped from any monster, which is very cool. Showa Town was kind of a disappointment for a lot of players. It was so overly hyped for such a long time, and when it finally released, people were already tired of it and it didn't live up to the hype. The censorship and the incredibly long delay before its release, as well as the fact that the anniversary event started at the same time and had unexpected level 64 weapons, kind of took the satisfaction out of finally seeing it released. Version 55, May 21st, 2008. A small update with this one. Multi-Pet was released, and the Red Draco Dragon Rider mount was made available to anyone who was actually level 200, which would have been maybe a few people at most on May 21st. ITCG Set 3 was released during this update on May 30th, 2008. Version 56, June 19th, 2008. This might be the longest maintenance ever recorded in GMS. This update contained massive changes to the client, including adding support for windowed mode for the first time. Ariant was released as well as Ariant Coliseum, but Magadia would have to wait to see its release. The NPC chat button we know and love was added. Item quality colors were implemented. Skill macros were implemented. The option to gather and sort your inventory was added. Minimap icons no longer blink and were changed to be static. Alliances were added. Initial pirate job data was added, most of it untranslated. Clean slate scrolls and chaos scroll data was added. A lot of major overhauls to the game happened with this update, and it took them 26 straight hours to complete it. One of the big reasons for this that Nexon didn't discuss publicly at the time might have been because of the switch to a new encryption algorithm for their client. I'm not going to speak on this as an expert because I don't fully understand how it works, but version 56 saw new types of encryption for the client that were not present before this, and I think that likely had a lot to do with this update taking so long. A lot of people have their own idea of when old school MapleStory stopped being old school MapleStory, and I think this is where a lot of people would draw the line. Changing the minimap from the classic style to this new style is probably too much for some people. And just to be clear, the difference here is that the little yellow/red/blue cylinder-shaped icons look different after version 56. Skill macros and item sort might be another point of contention, along with 100 other little changes we've seen. I don't mind, and I'd imagine most people don't mind, but it is worth mentioning. Version 57, June 26th, 2008. Despite the 26-hour maintenance in version 56, there were still a host of bugs. 1 week later, on the normal server check day, there was an update to fix a huge number of them that were added in version 56. For example, the swear filter didn't apply to the shout function of skill macros, meaning you could type whatever you wanted in the skill macro section and everyone would see it. Very cool. Clicking anything on your buddy list would break interaction with the UI, level 64 Maple items had incorrect animations, APQ was broken. It's not all very interesting, but it's worth noting. Version 58, July 8th, 2008. Still hot on the pursuit of the mini glitches in the game, this update was more bug fixes. There was some kind of glitch causing players to be disconnected with the error message, "A hacking attempt has been detected and MapleStory has been closed. Please contact Nexon if you have any queries." This update was specifically targeted at fixing that issue. Version 59, August 14th, 2008. Yolande was finally released. This was the 9th world added to GMS, and I remember playing around this time. I tried starting over in this new world, but eventually went back to Kaini as the population of Yolande was incredibly low. Crimsonwood Keep and Phantom Forest were released with this update. Bigfoot, Wind Raiders, Leprechauns, Typhons, and more were added to the game. Bigfoot was added, but was incorrectly labeled as not being a boss monster. This mislabeling caused a lot of issues with the boss that allowed players to kill it relatively easily at low levels, but we'll save that discussion for a different video. Leprechauns were also bugged, of course. A lot of the overpowered Crimsonwood weapons were made available via the Crimsonwood Keep exchange quest, and this was when we first saw Balanced Furies added to GMS. Jump Down was added to the game in this update, again making a drastic change to what OSMS was. Jump Down was originally a first job skill added to the files in version 54, but went unused to eventually become part of the game's engine. This looks like a dev icon to me, and there was never any text associated with it, so maybe it was never intended to be a skill. Version 60, September 10th, 2008. Bigfoot was fixed in this patch, acquiring its boss designation. Mini dungeons were released, though they were added to the patch files in version 59, and there's not much more to say about this patch. A lot of the information is lost, unfortunately. Version 61, October 15th, 2008. We find ourselves at another crossroads with this update. It's very divisive because of the content that was added. First of all, mini dungeons were altered to be event areas. They were no longer free to enter, and the monsters within would drop magic crystals. Players would be allowed one entry per day that lasts 5 minutes and could purchase event tickets from the cash shop, but I don't know how much they cost. Less than $1, I would hope. The magic crystals could be turned in for a variety of items, including skill books, which were normally only accessible from Zachem, but the number of magic crystals you needed for them was incredibly high. I would be very surprised if anyone was able to actually collect enough to turn in for a skill book or mastery book. Halloween events return, but they're very much unlike the last 3 events we've seen. Last year saw a shift in the way these events were handled, and I believe from this point onward it was impossible to get a pumpkin basket. Instead, we got Halloween PQs. I missed these in my Party Quest retrospective video, so let's cover them quickly. There were 2 PQs, Butler PQ and Maid PQ. Butler PQ was a series of 3 stages. In stage 1, the party would need to get through the 4 jump quests, breaking the boxes at the top of the stage to find the correct passage that will lead the party to the next stage. Stage 2 found the players in a giant room filled with mirrors. The party members would need to press up on every mirror until they found a mirror piece. Pressing up on the wrong mirror would summon a monster that would teleport the player back to the middle of the stage. Once someone finds the mirror, the path will be unlocked and everyone would need to go into the portal. This was another instance of marking incorrect mirrors to quickly inform the rest of the party which mirrors were already checked. Hey, in the middle of editing once again, and I realized for some reason I never wrote down stage 3 in the script. This PQ doesn't have 3 stages, it has 4 stages. So, stage 3 is a riddle. The butler will give everyone a riddle. Each riddle represents a bookshelf, and you have to click on the bookshelves in the right sequence. In stage 4, the final stage, everyone is given 50 pouches to catch ghosts, and the players need to collect 10 ghosts to turn in for 1 point. After collecting 3 points, the players can receive the prize from this PQ, the Masked Gentleman's Hat. This was a temporary item and only gave +4 stats, but it was dwarfed pretty heavily by the reward from the next PQ. Maid PQ was much simpler than Butler PQ. All you had to do was whack the pumpkin to carve it into a jack-o'-lantern. Ghosts will spawn that drop pumpkin pieces, and collecting 50 of these could be turned in for the pumpkin hat, which came clean with 1 to 3 weapon and magic attack. Even if you got the lowest roll, it would still likely beat the Masked Gentleman's Hat. Some changes to the way NX Cash was handled happened in this update. The gift token feature added in version 47 was removed, and Nexon Cash was split into 2 categories: PayPal and Nexon Game Card Cash. Players were able to gift items if they had Nexon Game Card Cash specifically. This was another security measure to combat NX fraud. ITCG Set 4 was released with this update as well. And finally, the part that I think will be a deal breaker for most people. The region of Singapore was added. This was another incredibly overpowered area, with Mysterious Path 3 and Ghost Ship maps having really good monsters to train on that immediately became the meta. Clerics could train in Ghost Ship 2 with heal and were completely invincible as long as they stayed in a very specific location. Remember how in version 0.24 beta I mentioned that it would be incredibly overpowered for a cleric to be able to heal from a safe spot? Well, that became reality in this update, and it was overpowered. Version 62, November 12, 2008. MapleStory veterans probably know what's coming with this one. The first new class ever added to MapleStory was released in version 62, Pirates. While they've evolved quite a bit in modern MapleStory, on release there were simply 2 of them, Buccaneer and Corsair, the original pirates. GMS's 10th world, Demethos, was added with this update, and there were the usual 2x events held for it. Extra character slot coupons were added to the cash shop with the release of the new job, so players could finally expand their character slots to 4, which became the new maximum. EXP Gachapon came out as well, and this was a system where players could buy Gachapon tickets in the cash shop and turn them into the EXP Gachapon NPC as long as they were under level 51. In return, they'd get a random scroll that gave a pre-designated amount of EXP depending on the type of scroll, anywhere from 100 EXP to 100,000 EXP. This is a weird piece of JMS pay-to-win content that we got in our version for a very short time. Thanksgiving events were held, and they were all repeats of last year, so there's not much to report. We got some free Maple points from Mom and Dad's Dinner Fixin's quest. The transparent face accessory item was added to the files, but I'm not sure whether it was available for purchase yet or not. The mini dungeon event came back for a full month this time, presumably with the same rewards, explicitly mentioning how people said that the last event was too short. Version 63, December 17th, 2008. Christmas events once again. The Crystal Rudolph pet, my favorite pet in the game, was added in this update. Finally! Holiday super sock mobs who would spawn on a random map every 2 hours were added and had pretty mediocre drops. I'm not sure what their purpose was. You'd imagine they would drop Christmas presents or something, but instead we get nothing. However, as is usually the case with major events and world releases, we saw a huge amount of 2x EXP and 2x drop events during this update. Holiday PQ was added as a new Christmas event, and I forgot about this PQ in my Party Quest retrospective video. It's just a reskinned Hennessy's PQ with a reward of either a Rudolph change hat or a Seraphim weapon of your choice. I think these were both temporary, unfortunately, and they're not around anymore. We also saw more GM monster summon events, which would have been occurring up until now in many major events. A few web events as well, but most impactfully, we saw the release of Meso bags in the cash shop. This is the first time we ever saw anything like this, and it put a direct value on Mesos for the first time. 10 million Mesos for $4.50. There was also a daily login event. If you logged in every day for a week, you'd get an NX item that was part of a set. I don't know if these NX set items were the same for everyone, or if it was just a random item. Magadia was finally made available, and some Magadia enemies were actually decent training options, so this was a very welcome addition. Great for all those new pirates. The EXP Gachapon was discontinued on December 30th, 2008, almost immediately after its release. Maybe it wasn't popular, or they just came up with something better. And fun fact, this was the first version of the game where the total size of the files reached 1 GB. Version 64, January 22nd, 2009. We've made our way to 2009. There are a huge number of major changes to the game this year, changing things up more in 1 year than we've seen since the beginning. Version 64 brought with it the 7th Day Market. This functioned almost identically to turnips in Animal Crossing. Items would be available for sale via Abdullah on Sundays, and they could be sold back Monday through Friday, with the prices changing every hour. The Auto AP button was added to the stat window in version 64. This is a feature we still have in modern MapleStory, and it automatically adds AP whenever the button is pressed, as long as the player has AP to spend. Back in the day, this was a nice accessibility feature, but it wasn't of any use to players who knew anything about stat builds. It would always add a predetermined amount to your primary and secondary stat based on your class choice, so it didn't have a lot of use with the no secondary stat meta being so prevalent by this point. Alongside this, we saw the addition of the skill recommendation system, which simply told the player what skills are recommended to add next in their skill window. The tutorial camp was removed and replaced with a new tutorial system, and maybe most offensively, we saw the removal of the dice rolling system on the character creation screen. Stats would instead automatically be added until the player receives their first job advancement or reaches level 11. We saw the return of Valentine's Day events and Lunar New Year's events, and lastly the addition of Magadia PQ, also known as Romeo and Juliet. Again, I covered this in my Party Quest retrospective video. Version 65, January 23rd, 2009. This was an emergency update taking place only 1 day after the previous. It fixed a game-breaking bug that caused the Amorian love seat to crash the game upon use. This might be the smallest whole number update we've ever seen for GMS. Version 66, March 5th, 2009. Crimsonwood Keep PQ, again discussed in the Party Quest retrospective video, was added in this update, and I love CWK PQ. It's the only thing resembling a raid that we ever received, though you could maybe count Guild PQ as nearly raid content. Interestingly, the Mark of Narracane reward from CWK PQ was tradable for this patch only. It became untradable in version 67. Malvolence PQ was added, but I've already discussed it yet again. The maximum number of buddy list slots was increased to 100, meaning it could be expanded to this amount via the NPC Mr. Goldstein. There were more monster invasion events, this time with a focus on Masteria enemies. The item lock cash shop item was added in its first iteration, and I think this might be the first time we saw the Shinobi Bracer in the game. Don't quote me on that, it's just a guess. It's been in the files since version 48, so I might be wrong about that. Version 67, April 8th, 2009. This update had a catchy name associated with it: new creatures and new features. This is something we'd see a lot more often post Big Bang, but it's cool to see them title the update something other than just pirates or bug fixes. And it's fitting because this is an absolutely massive update to the game. There were a ton of changes, so let's get to work knocking them out. Pop-up alerts when you reach the appropriate level for a PQ. NPCs no longer require 2 clicks to talk to, they can be interfaced with in a single click, and navigating through options in a dialog box was now possible using the arrow keys. The inventory received its wide update, where you can view the entire inventory in a large window without the need to scroll down. Quest chains have a different icon compared to normal quests. A button to display the quest giver NPC was added. A button to open the quest information window was added to the quest helper. Airship rides are now free with the exception of Maple Island. There were a few bug fixes and a lot of other relatively uninteresting small changes. The monster book was released in this update though. In its first form, it mostly served as a database for monsters with no real rewards associated with it other than the drop information. You could flex your monster book progress to other players though, since it showed in the character info window. The family system was also released in this update. I'm sure a lot of people remember this. It is literally a pyramid scheme for in-game content. You could invite up to 2 players to be your juniors, who would then be allowed to invite up to 2 players as their juniors, and there was no real limit to this system. It could go on forever. As a junior gained EXP and leveled up, the senior would receive reputation points. If a junior outleveled a senior, the amount of reputation granted after that point would be cut in half unless the senior then outleveled the junior once again. The perks of this system were only for seniors. Juniors really got nothing. Reputation was only gathered by seniors and could be used to activate a variety of EXP and drop buffs. As a content creator, I would love a system like this nowadays, but it was removed in the guild revamp in 2014. Remote Gachapon tickets were added to the cash shop, and this was a system that allowed access of Gachapon anywhere for an extra fee. I never once used this, and I have my fair share of Gachapon ticket uses. I thought the Easter events happened in this update as well, but I couldn't find any information about it. The damage cap, which had always been 99,999, was silently raised to 199,999 in this update. Leaf-free mini-dungeons were also added, alleviating the pressure of the sheer number of players trying to grind at skellies. A lot of maps were redesigned, altering their viability greatly. The best example of this is Hinnis' Hunting Ground 1, an iconic map that had its monster spawns changed. Nexon obviously thought this was a good idea, but I'm not sold. Drastically changing Victoria Island might be where I drew the line for what I consider to be OSMS. Internally, data for belts, medals, Scissors of Karma, and the Maker skill were all added. Version 68, April 10th, 2009. This was another bug fix update, taking up yet another major version, but at least they fixed some important stuff. Version 69, April 28th, 2009. This was another very small update. Game Guard was replaced with Hack Shield, that's all. Version 70, May 7th, 2009. Finally, we get another interesting update. This, as you may have guessed, is the 4th anniversary update for GMS. By this point, almost all updates were archived very well, so we'll have pretty complete information without me needing to browse a dozen different fan sites to find that information. Yes, it was a little frustrating, how could you tell? There were plenty of 2x EXP events held, as expected. There was a login event where players would hold on to candles for 40 minutes and were entered to win a prize if they did so. The usual anniversary events were held, including monsters dropping all maple weapons, shields, hats, etc. There was a maple tree growing server-wide event, a level up event where you could get maple leaves for leveling up, some kind of treasure hunt event that I've actually never heard of. Tink would trade rare monster cards for maple leaves, giving them an actual use. There was a maple quiz event that gave out maple leaves if you correctly answered the questions in the allotted time. And lastly, there were the usual GM events, including monster spawns. There were also skill rebalances that took place in this update. I'll quickly cover the interesting ones. Most impactfully, Maple Warrior's max level was increased to 30. This was in preparation for Pink Bean in the future, and it was still technically impossible to level this skill beyond 20 without the mastery book drop from Pink Bean. Dark Knight's Hyperbody had its duration increased to 300 seconds. Berserk's HP threshold was increased from 40% to 50%. Paladin's Threaten could now apply to boss mobs. Blast had its attack range increased. Ice Lightning Archmage's Chain Lightning had its damage increased. Archers had their minimum attack range decreased, and I'm not sure I ever knew that this happened before it was outright removed after Big Bang. Interesting. Marksman's skill Piercing's charge time was decreased to 1 second, and their snipe cooldown time was decreased to 5 seconds at max level. Shadower's Band of Thieves received a higher attacking range. Assaulter moved them farther. Most impactfully, this was the first buff we ever saw to Boomerang Step, decreasing the delay between attacks. Corsair's Flamethrower and Ice Splitter attack range was increased, and Battleship was changed to have a 90-second cooldown after breaking at all levels. Finally, Buccaneer received a change that let them use almost all of their skills in Transform and Super Transform mode. Previously, they were very heavily restricted on what they were allowed to use when transformed. There's a bit more to the skill changes, and these would be revised a few more times before Big Bang, but that's not even the most interesting part of this update. For the 4th anniversary event, Nexon decided to temporarily lower the amount of EXP required to level for GMS only. I believe this change eventually came to some other versions and was probably from another version, as we often see, but in GMS, we had an easier EXP curve starting with this anniversary event. As we'll soon learn, this wasn't so much of a temporary inclusion though. Version 71, June 17th, 2009. This update was, as we've seen so many times now, nothing more than bug fixes. Well, I say that, but it did also contain extensions to the anniversary events, including the EXP curve reduction. The image claims that it was back by popular demand, which I'm sure is true, but I wonder how much of an effect the community's feedback had on the extension of this event. Call me skeptical, but there's a solid chance Nexon always planned for this to be permanent, regardless of what we thought. Not that there's any world where a reduction in EXP required to level when implemented in a healthy way is that bad of a thing for MapleStory. Version 72, June 24th, 2009. Here we have another massive update, and this one was hugely impactful to the meta. The Temple of Time was released in its entirety. The original quests to unlock all of the Temple of Time areas and eventually the boss itself, Pink Bean, took a lot longer than it does today due to the requirement of killing 999 of every single monster in the temple. Pink Bean would only be available to fight in one channel per world, which was an interesting restriction that I think they only applied to Zachem and Horntail on their release. The first Pink Bean kill is decently documented, but I couldn't find the exact date for some reason. The best I have to go off of are the videos posted by the people in the party, so I guess I have to assume it was earlier than August 24th, 2010. This is a good deal after the release of the boss. Over a full year. Pink Bean had a very restrictive 1-hour time limit that gated the boss almost entirely behind pure DPS. I guess it wasn't until August 2010 that players acquired this level of DPS. I'm incredibly skeptical about this date though. I know Pink Bean was very difficult, but over a year? I wish I could find more information about this because I'm not sure I believe it. With Pink Bean's release, we saw timeless weapons enter the game, but nobody would get them for a long time. Rocks of Time, I'm pretty certain, only dropped from Pink Bean, and they were required to craft timeless weapons via the Maker skill that will be released next update. Acquiring timeless weapons simply came down to killing Pink Bean, whether you got the drop directly or received Rocks of Time that would allow you to craft them. Ellen Forest PQ was added in this update. You can check the Party Quest retrospective video for more information about that. The Find Master M event was started, which was partially covered in that video as well, since it contained a PQ. Scissors of Karma were released. This was a huge change that altered the accessibility of many powerful items, and this is another nail in the coffin for OSMS enthusiasts. Royal Hair coupons were released, and this is the first time I've seen them mentioned, so I guess this system is as old as 2009, and we still have it nowadays. One more interesting item from the cash shop, Maple Life. This is a system that allows users to buy a level 30 character, straight up. That's pretty crazy. But we'd see them return in the future, so I guess it wasn't that crazy. Titles and medals were released with this update. Only the initial ones like Celebrity, Quest Specialist, Veteran Hunter, the level 200 Explorer medals, etc. The final line of this update states that Bob the Snail was added to Drake's meal table. Just to confirm, I checked the files to see if this was really the case. I thought it was a joke. In version 49, a distinct Bob the Snail monster was added to the files, but for some reason in version 69 it was removed from Drake's meal table. This update, version 72, added the Bob the Snail enemy back to the map, and it wasn't a joke. Interesting. Version 73, July 29th, 2009. This is yet another pretty impactful update. Cygnus Knights were first released with this update, and they were referred to as a premium class. Creation of a Cygnus Knight required a level 20 character, and it was the usual original Cygnus Knight stuff, including Blessing of the Fairy. Ultimate Adventurers were not implemented until version 96, which was after Big Bang, so we won't be covering them in this video. The Maker skill was released, being a sort of precursor to the profession system we have now. Vicious's Hammer was added to the game, and this is a cash shop item that would add 1 extra slot to an equip, up to 2 extra slots total. Items that were hammered were not eligible for the MTS, and this functionality would be added later. Notably, bishops received a nerf in this update, a very unexpected one at that. Elemental stabs give a bonus for the element they correspond to. Prior to this update, that's the only effect they had. This meant that bishops were allowed to use the incredibly powerful elemental stabs that required no secondary stats and had more base attack than every other magician weapon. Bishops were already considered very overpowered with the NLC potions and the fact that skellies were simultaneously one of the best endgame grinding spots and were weak to the holy element, etc. There are a lot of reasons why bishops were considered overpowered. In this update, elemental stabs were changed to give a penalty when using holy element skills, effectively nerfing the hell out of bishops. It wasn't all terrible, it just meant that they needed to downgrade their weapon, but it certainly hurt them. And in my opinion, they deserved it. But we'll keep that off the record. That's just between you and me. There were some events, including a gachapon event with the Lost Miwok artifacts. I never really knew what went on with this quest, but I'm pretty sure you hunt for Miwok artifacts from monsters, purchase an enchanted scroll from the cash shop, and turn them into Toe, who would give you an item in exchange. You could craft the Circle of Ancient Thought and Circle of Ancient Strength rings with items Toe would give you. Version 74. August 12th, 2009. More bug fixes. Multipet wasn't working for Cygnus Knight characters, and the Vicious's Hammer was crashing players. I'm surprised it took them 2 weeks to fix that, considering it would have affected sales. Interesting. Version 75, August 26th, 2009. Nexon's new logo appeared in the game for the first time in this update. It's kinda cool, I guess. Monster Carnival 2 was released, which I covered in the Party Quest retrospective video. Mulung Dojo saw its initial release here along with belts, the new equip slot items. The Find Master M events came to an end. There was a back to school event and new 100% scrolls in the Gachapon update, as well as some pretty popular chairs. The 100% scrolls offered the same or similar improvements as a 60% scroll, and I think they were untradeable, making them a cool new premium option. Version 76, September 24th, 2009. This version had a couple small changes. The MTS was updated to allow hundreds more items to be listed that were previously restricted. We also saw the first iteration of what would eventually become the surprise style boxes in modern GMS. There's an interesting little event added wherein players could fish after gathering the fish nets from monsters. Collect enough and Gaga will give you the white and blue sandals or a beach sandals upgrade scroll. An interesting fact, Gaga is modeled as a caricature of Dae-Hyun Kang, the main director of MapleStory at this time. That's all this update really had to offer. There were some NX items added, royal hairs were updated and brought back. Back then they were a temporary event, not a mainstay in the game like they are nowadays. Version 77, October 22nd, 2009. Another Halloween event. I always get excited for Halloween because it's a promise that the best time of the year, winter, is coming soon. There was an event called Haunted House 2. This is basically the addition of the overpowered haunted house maps that were very meta-defining. Olivia had a series of quests that were level appropriate. Level 15 plus killed rotting skeletons, level 41 plus killed dead scarecrows, and level 61 plus killed twisted jesters. The quest line resulted in the player receiving 5 Heartstoppers and a good bit of EXP. Witch Malady had a new quest as well, involving killing her pets. Wow. You could get a few buff items from doing this quest line. They could also be acquired by collecting dark tokens that dropped from bosses. Naturally, there was a mistake that added these items to the Junior Nudies drop table, making them very easy to farm. Malady had another quest that rewarded much more iconic items though. You could get a talking witch hat, Witch's deep purple belt, and the broomstick. Finally, Malady's candies were changed to be called Halloween stick candies. These could be turned into Cassandra every hour to give a variety of items, including a leech costume, which was a use item that transformed the player into a leech. There was a level up event that rewarded players for reaching level milestones, and after level 75, every 5 levels would reward a surprise style box. There was a Gold Richie event. This involved collecting materials to collect an egg compass, after which Gold Richie will let you explore his treasure island and you'll find a variety of golden pig eggs. Golden Pig's Hard Eggs, a rare drop, could be traded into Golden Richie for EXP. You could also trade with him to get things. I honestly have no idea how this event worked. I didn't even know it existed until today. There was a Witch's Tower event that rewarded a pink bean hat and pink bean suit. Players would have to get through a timed jump quest and drop a marble at the end, and doing so was limited to 1 marble per day. After dropping 5 marbles, they received the pink bean hat. After acquiring the hat, they could do a quest that allowed them to get the pink bean suit. Cygnus Knights no longer required a level 20 character to create and were able to be created from the main screen instead of having to go through a specific dialogue and character creation menu on a different character. Malaysia was released along with Targa and Scarlion, meaning their hats were available to obtain. An upgrade to the Zachem helmet after 3 years. More medals were added, 2 new mini-dungeons came out, and Balrog was released. Not Junior Balrog or Crimson Balrog, the Balrog. The patch notes say it could drop Chaos Scrolls and White Scrolls on normal mode, but I'm not sure how difficult this boss was. I didn't actually realize it came out before Big Bang. Finally, there were Gachapon updates, including a loot box system. This is the era of MapleStory where I did not play if it wasn't obvious. The game started to feel a bit bloated and directionless, and I think this update exemplifies that. Version 78, October 22nd, 2009. That very same day, there was an emergency update to fix a host of issues. This is a very common theme. I'm actually impressed with Nexon nowadays for not having this be such a constant issue with their major updates. Version 79, November 11th, 2009. We still see Thanksgiving events in 2009, thankfully. They haven't been cut from GMS quite yet. This time, they implemented both regular turkeys and turkey commandos, the latter of which will drop the iconic Thanksgiving items and rarely their eye. This could be turned into Professor Foxwit in NLC for 50,000 mesos each. There was an ancient artifact hunt event wherein players would win a permanent version of the 3-day archaeologist's glasses and hat. Since these were only given out to the 10 players who collected the most points, they might be some of the rarest items in the game. Lastly, for the events was the Wolf and Sheep event. I've never participated in or even seen this. I don't know what it is. Permanent pets were available for a while, but this isn't the first time we've seen them, and it won't be the last. Aaron pre-release quests were added that I assume gave context and backstory to the class. And to wrap up the Thanksgiving update, there was a massive update to the Adventurer storyline. In that, they added one. This was the introduction of the class-specific bosses and Astaroth. I think this was the first time that they tried to implement a cohesive main story in GMS. Version 80, December 10th, 2009, the final update of 2009. We received GMS's 11th new world, Galicia, in theme with this update's main attraction, the release of Aaron. There were a ton of events, including the Lillin's Ring event that could reward a ring that gave +3 all stats and +3 attack. This ring could be shared through the account only. There was even an event to reward the 5 highest level Aarons by featuring them on the login screen. You could also get the combo medals by getting a high combo after reaching level 15. The Water of Life item that previously required the player to finish a quest in order to revive their pet was updated to simply revive the pet upon clicking, streamlining something that was mildly annoying. Vega's spell was first released, and this was an item that increased the success rate of scrolls for NX. Yep, it did that. The Explorer tutorial, also known as Maple Island, received an update as well as the option to skip it entirely. Mushroom Kingdom was first added in this update, being an iconic theme dungeon that I remember doing a lot. And lastly, the party EXP share formula was changed. This was obviously not announced, but it was a step to combat leeching, which had been a big problem since the release of 4th Job. I won't go too far into the details, but the amount of EXP that the leecher would receive was cut pretty significantly. Version 81, January 20th, 2010. Now we enter the new decade, and this is the final year of pre-Big Bang MapleStory. I'm sure by now, most of you have dismissed these updates in your mind with regards to where OSMS actually ends. I know I have. I don't want to be negative in this video, or any of my videos for that matter, but we're definitely entering the era of a directionless, confused game. With that being said, there are still plenty of interesting things to cover in these next 11 updates, so let's get to it. First, in version 81, we see the release of the 2 monster survival PQs, Abandoned Subway and Net's Pyramid. Mr. Lim, the director of the Abandoned Subway PQ, is a caricature of Guanghyun Lim, the art director at the time. Otherwise, kind of a small update. There was a Gachapon stamp event where you would receive a Gachapon stamp for every Gachapon or remote Gachapon ticket you purchased, and collecting a certain amount could be turned in for rewards. The only reward worth anything on this list when looking at it nowadays is the tiger skin chair. Gachapon was updated, including maple weapons and a new chair, and royal hairs returned. Valentine's Day events came back, I almost forgot about these. Mostly the same, but you could get a Cupid's Wings cape by returning Cupid's stolen arrows which dropped from monsters. Version 82, February 10th, 2010. This update was mostly security enhancements. Instead of the pin system, the game switched to a pick system, and the game would have to be launched via the website instead of the exe file. This is pretty ironic considering what we're about to learn. The Mardi Gras event was going on during this update, but I couldn't find much information about it. We do have a few interesting things in the Gachapon update. The couples chairs, the Amorian love seat, and the new Choco cake chair were available from the Gachapon, along with the addition of the Gachapon food coupon. It seems this was a reward from the Gachapon, so you'd get another ticket that you would then use to get food, presumably, and it was possible to receive an unripe onyx apple. I think this is when they were first added. Version 83, February 22nd, 2010. Herning Square Mall was added in this update, a cool theme dungeon similar to Mushroom Shrine that actually happened immediately after it. Neo City was added as well. This is the initial name for Neo Tokyo in GMS. There were some quality of life improvements in this update that Nexon referred to as the convenience factor. The quick slot function was updated to allow the player to rebind the keys. Dimensional Mirror was updated to major towns for the first time. The inventory was updated so that upon looting a new item, the corresponding tab would flash and highlight the item with an outline. All classes, not just adventurers, were now allowed to access the Astaroth questlines, and a new Astaroth polearm was added to the game. During this update, we saw the Perfect Pitch event. This was an event that would reward players for leveling up between March 3rd and March 30th. Every level would reward one perfect pitch, and you'd get bonuses at certain levels. Inkwell would reward you prizes based on the number of perfect pitch items you turned in, with the ultimate reward being the Wild Wolf bandana for 100 perfect pitches. This helmet beats a Zachem helmet weirdly, and I always wondered where it was from until now. Also, just like Gaga and Mr. Lim, Inkwell is a caricature of Hanbyo Oh, who is currently the head of Nexon Western Production, which I assume means he's in charge of our game. I think that's it for the updates. Now let me tell you a story. On February 27th, 5 days after this update, there was a major security breach due to the fault of a careless GM. A scrolling notice was posted in the game announcing a 2x EXP event, but there's something odd at the end of this notice. Ghost KD01 and KD02. To the average player, this was maybe a typo, maybe some IGNs that a GM had copied to their clipboard. The notice was quickly changed to remove the erroneous text, but as you can see, screenshots were already taken. It didn't matter too much that it was changed, the info was out there. A well-known hacker in the MapleStory community, Echo, took note of this erroneous text and had the idea that it might be login information. Echo is notorious for hacking, keylogging, hijacking accounts, etc. If it's illicit activity within MapleStory, Echo was doing it, and he had hacked into quite a few accounts by this point, so he probably recognized almost immediately that this could be a golden opportunity for him. Eventually, Echo got into the account that was accidentally posted in the notice, and as it turned out, it was the account of the GM Raven SCA, SCA standing for Scania. For an hour, Echo posted smegas and linked GM items, randomly sent out notices, and more. It's not really known how much power Echo was given. I believe GMs have a special separate client as a security measure, and without this client, a GM's abilities are likely limited. Echo could have done far more damage if this wasn't the case. Though I'm not sure Echo's motives were to hurt the game. People have always speculated that he was only motivated by fame and, well, he got his 15 minutes. This comes immediately after the drastic security changes to the game, of course. It just goes to show that while some security measures are better than having none at all, it's an arms race to combat the hacking and account hijacking members of your game's community. Though obviously don't post your incredibly sensitive GM account login info for the entire server to see. I would not be surprised if that employee was fired for this incident. I would fire them probably for being that careless. It's mind-blowing to me that they did that. It almost seems intentional. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. We have 9 more updates to discuss, so let's get to it. Version 84, March 31st, 2010. Evan was released with this update. It's a bit sudden to have a class come out this quickly after Aaron, which was only released 4 updates ago, but this was the new direction of the game. Evan had a few level up events with rewards such as the Dragon Glasses and the Trailblazer medals. The Trailblazer medals are interesting because for a set amount of time, they would give bonus EXP and a discount on potions as long as they were equipped. There were a lot of Evan launch events, too many to cover, but you can see them here. With Evan came the introduction of paid mastery books. Critical Magic, Magic Booster, and Magic Guard are all core skills for an Evan, and they were limited to level 5 unless you purchased the mastery books from the cash shop. This would eventually be changed, but for a long time, this was how it worked. Evan's core skills were locked behind a paywall. Of course, at this time, you were able to earn free annex through surveys and such, which I remember doing often, so it was still pretty easy to earn the amount you needed for these mastery books. It was still a bad precedent to set, and something we'd see again, unfortunately. Neo City was updated, adding 3 new maps and 2 new bosses, and the new bosses could drop new items. I'm not sure exactly which items were added because this data was in the files for a long time before being accessible, so it's hard to spot what changed. Internally, data for Dragon Rider PQ was added to the files to be released in the next update. And finally, there was a bug fixed with Net's Pyramid that allowed players to smuggle out the damage increasing effect, which is something I missed in the Party Quest retrospective video. Version 85, May 5th, 2010. The 5th anniversary. This was the final anniversary event before Big Bang. I don't think any new Maple weapons were added, level 64 was still the highest tier. Dragon Rider PQ was released, and I covered this in my Party Quest retrospective video, including the durability items that were also added in this update. Durability items were kind of a precursor to item potentials, giving bonus effects based on level, class, etc. I'm not sure durability items were too popular though. I wasn't playing during this update, but I never hear anyone talk about them or even mention them. The only discussion surrounding them is always, what are durability items? The Astaroth quests received a revamp. The level restrictions were removed, the item drop rates were increased, and the EXP rewards were increased substantially, according to Nexon. Platinum Scissors of Karma were added. These were a higher tier of the regular Scissors of Karma so that they could complicate the game and separate items based on tier, I guess? There was a 5th anniversary confetti effect item added, but most interestingly with the 5th anniversary, we saw the first cake versus pie event. This first cake versus pie would allow the player to pick a side, and they'd be loyal to this side for the entire event. The update notes are a little ambiguous, and I'm trying to understand how this worked. If you turn in enough pieces, your faction boss would be summoned. If you attack your own faction boss, it recovers health, and if the opposing team attacks it, it loses health. The first faction whose boss dies is the loser. I would assume that both sides would need to turn in the pieces entirely before either boss is summoned, otherwise this doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't want to summon your own boss on its own because that would give a win condition to the other faction without giving your faction any sort of win condition. The winning side would be rewarded with insignias that could be turned in for a variety of items to their faction leaders. Okay, that's Gordon Ramsay. Alongside this, they'd receive a boost to their EXP in the areas surrounding the town that they won the battle in, as well as access to that area's mini dungeons. They would also receive a 20% discount on items in those towns, probably great for low-leveled characters. There were also a few event-exclusive rings that were added that would increase party EXP by 80% and give a boost to drop rate if you were training in a party. Lastly, I want to mention the It's Raining Buffs event. This was an event that was another precursor to something we see often in GMS nowadays: map-wide buffs that occur at set times during events. In this update, you would get the Congrats from GM buff if you were in a town at the right time of day. Version 86, June 16th, 2010. This update included more balance changes. These are far more game-changing than the ones we saw in version 70. Some of the noteworthy changes: Fire Poison's Fire Arrow would hit multiple enemies, and Elemental Amplification was boosted to give even more damage. Corsairs could now use multiple skills without a minimum distance requirement, and their battleship was given more health. Buccaneers received some small boosts to Demolition and Dragon Strike, increasing range and lowering attack delay respectively. Paladin's Threaten would decrease attack and defense by a percentage instead of a flat value. Their Thunder/Lightning charge could now stack with their other charges. Dark Knight's Beholder will no longer overwrite buffs stronger than it. Marksman's Snipe had another cooldown reduction. Shadower's Steel could now hit multiple enemies, and Boomerang Step's delay was reduced even further. All of these changes were pretty great for the game, but it was at this point that Nexon realized that they could make changes like this, so we'd see it happen a lot from now on. Golden Temple, along with Ravana, was released in this update. I think Golden Temple was accessible by everyone, but the mini dungeons required a ticket from the cash shop to enter. It's so weird thinking about these updates from the perspective of an adult who has money. As a kid, anything that was paid was practically off limits, but nowadays I see this and I think, yeah, I probably would have checked that out to see how good the EXP and drops were. There was an event I never knew about called Cassandra's Weapon Rental. Talking to Cassandra and doing her quest would reward the player with a master weapon, at least that's what they were called by the patch notes. These were lower level but stronger versions of certain items that were temporary, lasting only 7 days. This is similar to the Internet Cafe item rental but in GMS. I've looked through databases of OSMS many times and always wondered if these weapons were ever available, and it turns out they were. In fact, they likely still exist in someone's inventory because 10 random players were given a permanent master weapon, more super rare items to add to the list. Lastly, there was an event where players in a party with an Evan would receive 10% bonus EXP when doing party quests. Version 87, June 23rd, 2010. Mostly bug fixes in this update, not a lot to report. The Dual Blade pre-release quests were started on June 30th during this patch. Version 88, July 21st, 2010. Yes, another new class Dual Blade was released in version 88. Dual Blades come with their own set of important skills locked behind paid mastery books, but instead of just 3, there were 6 skills behind the paywall. I think they wanted to make this a thing moving forward, but Evan and Dual Blade were the only 2 classes to ever receive this system. Resistance classes were the next to be released after Dual Blade, and they never had paid mastery books. So I guess Nexon tried it and decided it wasn't worth the negativity. The backlash to profit ratio wasn't in their favor enough with this one. Just like with Aaron and Evan, Dual Blade had a bunch of release events. I'm just going to show them quickly here, but this is the origin of the Dual Blade masks that you can still find in modern MapleStory. This was a big update in general, even beyond the release of Dual Blade. Potentials were added up to unique. This is one of the most fundamental core progression systems in the game nowadays, and this is where we first saw it over 13 years ago. Legendary tier potentials would not be released for a while longer. With this potential release, equip drop rates were increased substantially. Equip enhancement was added to the game. These are scrolls that would increase stats randomly, similar to a chaos scroll when used on an item that already had all of its upgrade slots used. This would also give it a star, and this was the first iteration of the Star Force system we have nowadays, which is also a core progression system in modern MapleStory. The follow system was released. This was a system wherein the player could right-click on another player and follow them around, copying their movements until the player being followed used an attack, at which point the follow action was cancelled. This was a very short-lived system that I didn't even really know existed for a while. The login screen was changed in this update, throwing out the old login screen we'd had since beta. Sad to see it go. And lastly, Pam's Song, a cache item that would protect a slot from being used one time, just like a white scroll, was added to the cache shop for almost $20 a piece. Okay, hi, Editing Togain here. I was editing this and I realized I didn't talk about Chaos bosses. Chaos Zachem and Chaos Horntail came out with this update. I don't know how I forgot that. I think I was getting really tired of writing the script at this point, so I just left it out. There you go, I didn't forget it. Version 88 feels like the first step of Big Bang, and that's because it kind of was. These are pretty big overhauls to systems we've known for a long time. Big Bang wasn't the single update that changed everything all at once. We saw some core gameplay adjustments before and after, but I think when people refer to Big Bang colloquially, they're referring more to the updates surrounding Big Bang that changed the game so drastically. This period of 10 to 20 updates that shook up the game so heavily. Version 89, August 19th, 2010. We see some GMS exclusive content with this update. It was titled The Visitors and was an alien-themed update with a lot going on. This event was very cool and actually changed the in-game worlds to reflect the alien ships appearing and dropping alien monsters into the maps. Of course, this caused a few issues, since low-level players would often be unable to grind. Killing the monsters required the Bing Machine Alpha suit to be equipped, and they stole monster slots from the monsters in the maps they would appear on. Because the Bing Machine Alpha suit was not a cache item, it meant that players needed to have it equipped to kill the aliens, so they were not allowed to have their normal gear on if they wanted to grind. Apparently, there was an issue with this event that caused the servers to crash, and the Bing suit was unobtainable for a while after this. The only people who could kill the aliens at this point were the ones who were lucky enough to acquire the suit before the servers crashed. This meant that almost all maps were basically overrun with aliens who were unkillable unless you had special damage like meso explosion or snipe. Honestly though, as bad as this sounds, it seems pretty lore accurate. The aliens came in and overtook our world for a couple of days. The spacecraft PQ was released in this update, which was covered in the Party Quest retrospective video. Along with the visitor event, a ton of visitor items were added to the game. These were obtainable from the alien PQ, and there were a lot of them. There was no reason for Nexon to add this many versions of these items. One each would have been sufficient. Otherwise, this update didn't have much of anything going for it. It was mostly the visitor event, which turned into a bit of a mess at first, but was eventually fixed and commenced as planned for the rest of the updates. During this patch, Nexon posted an announcement to name the Big Bang update. They called it the Rebirth of Maple World and asked players to submit names for the Big Bang patch. Weirdly enough, the community voted on calling it Big Bang. I'm not sure if this was because they couldn't come up with anything better or if everyone just really liked that name, but this was something that happened. Version 90, September 29th, 2010. This is the release of Ice Gorge PQ and Ghost Ship in the Sea Mist, both of which I already covered. Ninja Castle was released and the Halloween event started in this update, but because of the lack of archived patch notes for this version, this is all I can report. Looking at the files, we can see that Ulu City content was added in preparation for version 91, including the boss Krexel. Version 91, October 27th, 2010. Archives for these versions right before Big Bang are very hard to find. All I have are bullet points for these last two updates. Ulu City was added, a bunch of events were ended, and the Thanksgiving event was started. Version 92, November 23rd, 2010. And this brings us to our last update before Big Bang. It was comprised of a lot of bug fixes, improvements to the compatibility of the client with Windows 7, the return of the Gold Richie event, and the official retirement of Dewey, the item delivery NPC. Version 93 was the Big Bang update, which changed a lot of the game, but we'll save that for another time. That finally concludes our adventure through the updates of pre-Big Bang MapleStory. This was by far the most research-intensive video I've ever made. I never even had the idea to do this until I started working on a different script and thought to myself, this kind of needs context, even for my own knowledge. I already have and would likely continue to get things wrong if I hadn't done a deep dive into the actual update history. I feel much more informed now, but I'll definitely still make mistakes. One of the things I learned from looking through all of these updates is that OSMS, in my opinion, actually ended far earlier than I once thought. Originally, I said I would cut it off at version 72, but after looking through all of this stuff and the major changes the game went through starting around mid-2008, I would probably say that, for me, the end of OSMS was version 55. I'm curious what you think the last true OSMS update was before it changed too much. Was it version 62 when Pirates came out? Was it version 3 when they removed the beta version text from the UI? I think it's pretty universally agreed upon that the game had a huge drop in quality towards the end of the pre-Big Bang era, but I might be the only one who feels this way. Maybe when we look at the updates after Big Bang, I'll have a more complete picture in my mind, but for now, we've entered the era of what I think is a directionless game and will be here for a while. I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making it. Digging through the history of MapleStory is always so fascinating to me. In many ways, I think modern MapleStory is the best the game has ever been, but there's something special about that old UI, the original 4 jobs, the 2000s in general. It holds a special place in everyone's heart, and I love making videos about old school MapleStory. And with that, this video comes to a close. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.